In the meeting room, the millionaire confidently presented the contract that would define the company's future. Suddenly, a girl interrupts and shouts, "They're going to steal half of everything from you." Dad. Shock grips the executives as they see the cleaning lady's daughter expose the fraud no one had noticed. What the millionaire does will leave everyone in shock. In the towering glass fortress of Mitchell Innovations, 60 floors above downtown San Francisco, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Richard Mitchell's corner office. The panoramic view of the Bay Bridge and the shimmering water beyond seemed to affirm his position at the top of the tech world. At 54, Richard had built an empire from nothing, a classic American success story of grit, sacrifice, and ruthless determination. "Mr. Mitchell, the representatives from Apex Global will be here in 15 minutes, his assistant's voice announced through the intercom. Richard straightened his Italian silk tie and glanced at the portfolio on his desk. The merger with Apex would be his crowning achievement, a $4.8 billion deal that would secure Mitchell Innovations' dominance in the artificial intelligence market for decades. After months of negotiations, today was merely a formality. Sign the papers, shake hands, pop champagne, simple. The elevator chimed and Richard frowned. The Apex team wasn't due yet. He turned to see his head of security, Marcus, step into the office with an uncomfortable expression. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation in the lobby." Richard's jaw tightened. "Whatever it is, handle it. I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career. Sir, it's a child, a young girl who insists on seeing you. She refuses to leave and claims it's an emergency regarding the Apex contract." Richard nearly laughed. "A child? Is this some kind of joke?" "No, sir. She's quite insistent. Says her name is Emma Reynolds." The name meant nothing to Richard. "And why exactly should I care about some random kid in my lobby?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. She says she's your daughter, sir." The words hung in the air like smoke. Richard's expression hardened into stone. "That's impossible. I don't have children. I understand, sir. That's what I told security. But she's causing quite a scene." Very articulate for her age, she mentioned specifics about the Apex merger that aren't public knowledge. Richard's blood ran cold. Corporate espionage was rampant in Silicon Valley, but using a child as a front was a new low, even for his competitors. "Fine, bring her up. I'll deal with this quickly." 5 minutes later, Richard found himself staring at a small figure sitting primly on his leather sofa. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old, with chestnut brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and startlingly intelligent hazel eyes that looked unsettlingly familiar. "So," Richard began coldly, "you've caused quite a disruption, young lady. Who put you up to this?" The girl studied him with an intensity that was disconcerting in someone so young. "Nobody put me up to anything, Mr. Mitchell. Or should I call you Dad?" Richard felt his temper rising. "This isn't amusing. Industrial espionage is a federal offense, and whoever sent you here—" "My mother is Sarah Reynolds," the girl interrupted. "She worked as a housekeeper at your Lake Tahoe property 9 years and 8 months ago." Richard froze. Sarah Reynolds, a name from another lifetime. A brief affair, nothing serious. She had left his employment suddenly without explanation. "That proves nothing," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I'm not here about proving my paternity, though a DNA test would resolve that quickly enough." The girl, Emma, pulled a tablet from her backpack. "I'm here about page 17 of the Apex contract, specifically subsection 4C through 4F, which contains deliberately obscured language designed to transfer controlling interest of your neural network patents to Apex's subsidiary in the Cayman Islands." Richard stared at her, momentarily speechless. Few people outside his executive team had seen the full contract. "How could you possibly—" "Mom still cleans for Senator Harrison. He's on Apex's board. He left his briefcase unlocked last week." Emma swiped through her tablet to display photographs of contract pages. The language is sophisticated, buried under legal jargon about cooperative cross-implementation of proprietary technologies. But it essentially transfers majority ownership of your core IP within 18 months. Richard's mind raced. He had teams of lawyers reviewing this contract for months. Had they missed something this critical? "Why would you care about this?" he demanded. "Even if you're claim about your mother were true, why bring this to me? Emma's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability. Because you're my father, and because she's worked herself to exhaustion for 9 years to give me a good life. She deserves better than that. So do you. A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard's assistant peeked in. Sir, the Apex team has arrived. They're waiting in the conference room. Tell them I'll be delayed. Something urgent has come up. Richard turned back to Emma once they were alone. How do I know this isn't some elaborate trick? Corporate sabotage. Call your lawyer, Emma suggested calmly. Have them review those specific sections. I'll wait. Richard studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. All familiar, all disconcertingly like his own reflection. 20 minutes later, Richard was listening to Victoria Hughes, his chief legal counsel, on speakerphone. I don't know how we missed this. Richard, Victoria's voice was tense with suppressed anger. It's brilliantly concealed, but she's right. This clause essentially hands over your neural tech patents to their offshore holding company within 2 fiscal years. We need to stop this signing immediately. Richard ended the call and turned to Emma, who sat quietly watching him process this information. The corporate predator in him recognized he'd just avoided financial disaster. The man in him was confronting a much more personal earthquake. How old are you exactly? He asked after a long silence. 9 years and 3 months. The timing matched perfectly with Sarah's employment and sudden departure. Richard felt the foundation of his carefully constructed life shift beneath him. Where is your mother now? She works 3 jobs. Housekeeper for Senator Harrison, evening receptionist at Pacific Heights Medical Center, and weekend shifts at the Grand Hyatt downtown. Emma's voice held no accusation, just a matter-of-fact delivery that somehow made it worse. She never told me to come here. She doesn't know I'm here. She'd be furious. Then why did you? Emma hesitated for the first time. I saw the contract last week. I've been teaching myself contract law through online courses. I recognized what they were trying to do to you. She looked down. And maybe I thought it was time we met. Richard Mitchell had built a reputation as a ruthless negotiator, a man whose emotional detachment was legendary in boardrooms across America. Yet in that moment, faced with this poised, brilliant child claiming to be his daughter, a child who had just saved him from corporate annihilation, he felt something crack in his carefully constructed armor. Your mother never told me, he said quietly. She tried. Once your assistant said you were in Tokyo and couldn't be disturbed for personal matters. Emma's gaze was direct without judgment. After that, she decided you probably wouldn't want to know. That your life had no room for us. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Mitchell, the Apex team is getting restless. Should I offer them refreshments? Richard pressed the button. Tell them I've discovered concerning irregularities in the contract that require immediate resolution. The signing is postponed. He turned back to Emma. I need to speak with your mother. She finishes at Senator Harrison's at 3 today. Then she has a 2-hour break before her hospital shift. Richard checked his watch. It was nearly 2:30. I'll drive you back to her. We have things to discuss. For the first time, Emma smiled, a small, cautious gesture that nonetheless transformed her serious face into something that made Richard's chest tighten inexplicably. I hoped you'd say that, she said quietly. As they rode the private elevator down to the parking garage, Richard studied the child beside him. Her clothes were clean but obviously well worn, her backpack patched in several places. Yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older, someone with nothing to prove. The merger was supposed to be my legacy, Richard said, more to himself than to Emma. The culmination of 20 years of work. Emma looked up at him. Maybe your legacy is something else entirely. The elevator doors opened to reveal Richard's collection of luxury cars. Emma's eyes widened slightly at the gleaming vehicles. The Tesla, she said immediately. Electric is better for the environment. Richard found himself holding back an unexpected smile as he led her toward the sleek black sedan. For a man who prided himself on never being surprised, this day had proven to be nothing but surprises. And as they pulled out of the garage into the bright California sunshine, Richard Mitchell had the distinct feeling that his carefully ordered life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. What he couldn't know was that the contract trap was merely the beginning, and that the forces behind it would not take his discovery lying down. The greatest test of his life would not be in the boardroom, but in reconciling the man he'd become with the father he might yet be. Behind them, in the Mitchell Innovations Tower, Charles Montgomery, CEO of Apex Global, was receiving a text message. Mitchell knows. Move to contingency plan. The corporate chess match had only just begun. Senator Harrison's Pacific Heights mansion gleamed in the afternoon sun, its manicured gardens and classical architecture projecting old money stability. Richard parked the Tesla along the curved driveway, feeling strangely nervous. 9 years had passed since he'd seen Sarah Reynolds, 9 years in which she'd apparently been raising his child while working herself to exhaustion. Mom usually uses the service entrance, Emma said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Around the back. Richard felt a pang of something unfamiliar, shame perhaps. We'll use the front door. I know Harrison. Emma shrugged, but Richard caught a flicker of satisfaction in her expression. She was proud to walk through the front door with her father, he realized. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through him. The housekeeper who answered the door recognized Richard immediately, her eyes widening. Mr. Mitchell, the senator isn't home today. I'm here to see Sarah Reynolds, Richard said firmly. Sarah? The woman looked confused, then suspicious. Is there a problem, sir? Just tell her she has a visitor, please. The woman disappeared inside, leaving Richard and Emma in the marble-floored entryway. Emma seemed completely at ease, studying a nearby painting with the critical eye of an art appraiser. Reproduction, she commented. The brushwork lacks the spontaneity of the original Monet. Richard raised an eyebrow. You know art? I read. A lot. Emma glanced up at him. The library is free. Before Richard could respond, footsteps approached rapidly from the hallway. Sarah Reynolds appeared, still wearing her housekeeper's uniform, her face flushed with either exertion or emotion. She stopped dead when she saw them together. Emma, she gasped. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at coding club. Then her eyes found Richard, and all color drained from her face. Richard, she whispered, one hand instinctively grasping the doorframe for support. Hello, Sarah, Richard said quietly. I believe we have some important matters to discuss. Sarah's eyes darted between them, landing on Emma with a mixture of fear and disbelief. What have you done? She asked her daughter. Emma lifted her chin. What you should have done years ago. Mrs. Peterson, Sarah called to the other housekeeper without taking her eyes off Richard. Could you please tell Mrs. Harrison I had a family emergency? I need to leave early today. 10 minutes later, they sat in an upscale cafe several blocks away. Richard had insisted on driving them there, away from the senator's home where walls had ears. Sarah sat ramrod straight, her work uniform incongruous among the cafe's wealthy patrons. Emma calmly sipped a hot chocolate, seemingly the most composed of the three. You had no right, Sarah finally said to Emma, her voice low and strained. We agreed. No, you decided, Emma corrected her. I never agreed to anything. She saved me from a corporate takeover today, Richard interjected, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. Hidden clauses in a merger contract. None of my lawyers caught it. Sarah's expression softened with unmistakable pride as she glanced at Emma, before hardening again when she looked back at Richard. She's always been exceptional. Yes, I'm beginning to see that. Richard studied Sarah's face. She was still beautiful, though clearly exhausted with new lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of years of struggle. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? I tried once. Her laugh was brittle. Your assistant said you were too busy for personal matters. After that, well, your reputation preceded you, Richard. The ruthless bachelor CEO, children weren't exactly part of your brand. That wasn't your decision to make, Richard said, a flash of anger breaking through his controlled facade. Wasn't it? Sarah's eyes flashed. I was a housekeeper. You were Richard Mitchell. What exactly did you think would happen? That you'd welcome us with open arms? Set up a college fund? Introduce your cleaning lady and her bastard child to your board of directors? Mom? Emma interrupted quietly. That's not fair. He didn't know. Richard felt a rush of gratitude toward this child he'd met only hours ago. I had a right to know, he said more gently. Whatever decision came after that, that could have been a discussion between adults. Sarah deflated slightly, years of defensive posturing momentarily cracking. Maybe you're right. But I was 24, pregnant and terrified. And you were intimidating. It was easier to just disappear. And work 3 jobs to make ends meet, Richard challenged. Sarah's chin lifted. We've done fine. Emma has everything she needs. Except a father, Emma said quietly, looking down at her hot chocolate. A heavy silence fell over the table. Outside San Francisco, life continued. Tech workers hurrying past, tourists taking photos, the clang of a cable car in the distance. Inside, 3 lives hung in a moment of reckoning. The Apex merger, Richard finally said, turning to Emma. How did you know those clauses were traps? Emma shrugged, seemingly relieved by the change of subject. I've been taking online law courses from Stanford's continuing education program. Contract law is fascinating. It's all about hiding daggers in plain sight. Sarah smiled tiredly. She taught herself to read at 3. By 5, she was correcting my grammar. The public gifted program can barely keep up with her. Pride swelled in Richard's chest before he could stop it. She has my analytical mind, he observed. And my common sense, thankfully, Sarah retorted, but there was less edge to her voice now. Richard leaned forward. I want a DNA test, he said directly. Not because I doubt you, he added quickly, seeing Sarah's expression darken, but because if Emma is my daughter, I intend to acknowledge her legally immediately. Sarah paled. Richard, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. 9 years have been lost. I won't lose another day. Emma watched this exchange with sharp eyes, saying nothing but missing nothing. There's something else you should know, Richard continued. The Apex contract had a clause about heirs. I would have had to legally disavow any previously unacknowledged children to complete the merger. Sarah's eyes widened. That's oddly specific. Very, Richard agreed grimly. Almost as if they knew about Emma. That's impossible, Sarah whispered. No one knows except my mother and sister. And Senator Harrison's family, Emma pointed out. I've heard Mrs. Harrison on the phone. She loves gossip. Richard's mind raced through the implications. If Apex knew about Emma, what else did they know? And how far would they go to force the merger? I need to get back to the office, he said suddenly. There's more to this than just hidden contract clauses. So that's it? Sarah asked, an old hurt resurfacing in her eyes. You'll acknowledge her, write some checks, and we'll see you at Christmas? Richard met her gaze directly. No, Sarah, that's not it at all. Emma is my daughter. That changes everything. How? Sarah challenged. For starters, you're both coming to stay at my house tonight. Sarah laughed incredulously. We are not. Someone targeted my company using knowledge of my personal life. Richard cut in, his voice deadly serious. Knowledge that very few people have. Until I understand what's happening, I'm not letting either of you out of my sight. Emma perked up. You have a security system with biometric authentication, don't you? I read about it in Tech Today. Emma, we are not imposing on Mr. Mitchell, Sarah began. Richard, he corrected. And it's not an imposition. It's overdue. He hesitated, then added more softly. Please, Sarah, let me do this one thing right. Sarah studied him for a long moment, years of distrust, warring with the practical reality of their situation. Finally, she sighed. We'll need to get our things from the apartment. I'll have someone pick them up, Richard said, already reaching for his phone. Just make a list. I'm perfectly capable of packing my own bag, Sarah insisted. Richard recognized the pride in her voice, the same pride that had likely sustained her through 9 years of raising their child alone. Of course, he conceded. We'll stop there first. The apartment building in the Mission District was a stark contrast to both Harrison's mansion and Richard's own penthouse in Russian Hill. The narrow, 3-story walk-up had seen better days, its facade weather-worn and fire escape rusted. Sarah caught Richard's expression as they climbed the stairs. It's clean and safe, she said defensively. The neighborhood has a good school. Richard said nothing, following them up to the 3rd floor. The apartment was tiny but immaculately kept, a single bedroom that Sarah clearly shared with Emma, a small living room lined with overflowing bookshelves, and a kitchenette barely big enough for a mini refrigerator and 2-burner stove. Emma immediately began gathering books and her laptop, while Sarah disappeared into the bedroom to pack. Richard stood in the center of the living room, taking in the evidence of their life together. Emma's academic awards pinned to a corkboard, well-worn furniture carefully maintained, framed photos of mother and daughter at various school events. One photo caught his eye, Emma as a toddler, maybe 3 years old, holding up a crude drawing of what appeared to be 3 stick figures. A tall one labeled Mom, an even taller one labeled Dad, and a small one in the middle labeled Me. "I always knew about you," Emma said quietly, appearing at his elbow. "Mom made sure I did. She never said anything bad about you, just that you were very important and busy. I used to imagine you were secretly watching over us, like in a movie." Richard felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the wall he'd built around his emotions after his own father had abandoned their family decades ago. He'd sworn never to be that man, and yet here he was, having unknowingly become exactly that. "Emma," he began, but found himself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. She studied him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "It's okay. You didn't know." "That doesn't make it okay," Richard said firmly. "But I'm here now." Sarah emerged from the bedroom with a small duffel bag. "We can't stay with you indefinitely, Richard. We have our own lives. One night," he promised. "Until I understand what's happening with Apex, then we'll figure something out." He glanced around the tiny apartment again. "Something better than this." "We don't need your charity," Sarah said sharply. "It's not charity when it's family," Richard replied, surprising himself with the word. As they descended the stairs, Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. His legal counsel. "Emergency at the office. Apex threatening lawsuit for breach of contract. Board calling emergency session. Where are you?" Richard showed the message to Sarah. "I need to deal with this." Sarah nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Of course, we can take an Uber to your place later." "Absolutely not." Richard's tone brooked no argument. "You're coming with me. Both of you. To your office." Sarah looked down at her housekeeper's uniform in dismay. "There's a boutique on the ground floor of my building," Richard said, already guiding them toward the Tesla. "Get whatever you need." As they drove back toward the financial district, Emma spoke up from the back seat. "They're moving faster than I expected." Richard glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "The Apex. They must have contingencies ready if they're already threatening lawsuits." Emma frowned thoughtfully. "Someone at your company is helping them." Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What makes you say that?" The contract trap was too specific. They knew exactly which patents to target. Your most valuable ones. "And that clause about heirs?" "That's not standard language." Emma met his eyes in the mirror. "You have a mole, Dad?" The word Dad hit Richard like a physical force. He saw Sarah glance sharply at Emma, but neither of them commented on it. "If she's right," Sarah said instead, "you're walking into a hornet's nest." Richard's mouth set in a grim line as they pulled into the underground parking at Mitchell Innovations. "I've been dealing with corporate vipers for 20 years. Sarah, I can handle a few hornets." What he didn't say was that he'd never before had so much to lose, or so much to fight for. As they stepped into the private elevator, Richard's phone buzzed again, a message from his head of security. "Sir, Apex representative still in building. James Taylor insisting they stay until issue resolved." James Taylor. His CFO, the man who had overseen the Apex negotiations from the beginning. "Change of plans," Richard said as the elevator doors closed. "We're going to my private suite first. There are some people I don't want you meeting just yet." Emma looked up at him with a slight smile. "The game is getting interesting, isn't it?" Despite the gravity of the situation, Richard found himself smiling back. "Indeed it is, Emma. Indeed it is." Richard's private executive suite occupied the entire western corner of the 59th floor, a sanctuary few employees ever entered. As he ushered Sarah and Emma through the discreet secondary entrance, he felt the strange collision of his carefully separated worlds, the ruthless corporate titan meeting the family he never knew he had. "Wow," Emma breathed, taking in the sweeping views of the Golden Gate Bridge. The afternoon sun cast the city in a golden glow, the bay waters shimmering like scattered diamonds below. "You can see everything from here." "That's the idea," Richard replied, activating the suite's security protocols with a fingerprint scan. The glass walls instantly transitioned to one-way mirrors, maintaining the view while ensuring privacy. No one can enter without my authorization now. Sarah stood awkwardly in her uniform, clearly uncomfortable in these opulent surroundings. Richard, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be here. Your board meeting. We'll wait until I'm ready, Richard finished firmly. He gestured toward a door on the far side of the suite. There's a guest bathroom through there with a shower. I keep spare clothes for clients who fly in unexpectedly. While Sarah reluctantly disappeared to change, Emma wandered the suite, examining everything with undisguised curiosity. She paused at Richard's desk, studying a framed photograph, the only personal item in the otherwise minimalist space. "Is this your mother?" she asked, pointing to the image of a silver-haired woman with Richard's same determined jawline. Richard nodded, surprised by the girl's perception. "Yes, she raised me and my sister alone after our father left. Worked 3 jobs like your mother." The parallel wasn't lost on him, though he'd never acknowledged it before. What happened to him? "Your father? He decided his freedom was more important than his responsibilities," Richard said tersely. Old wounds still unhealed after all these years. Emma studied his face with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. "And you decided never to have children because you were afraid you might do the same thing." It wasn't a question. Richard stared at her, momentarily speechless. How could this child see through decades of his carefully constructed defenses in mere hours? "I'm not afraid of anything," he said finally, more sharply than he intended. Emma smiled slightly. "Everyone's afraid of something, Dad, even you." Richard's phone buzzed, saving him from having to respond. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping away toward the windows. "Richard, where the hell are you?" Victoria demanded without preamble. "The board is assembled. Apex's lawyers are threatening all kinds of legal hell. And James is telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown." "James would say that," Richard replied coldly. "I'll be down shortly. Keep them all there." "Richard, what's going on? This isn't like you." He glanced at Emma, who was now examining his collection of industry awards with a critical eye. "Let's just say I've had a revelation about our CFO's loyalties, and about what really matters." "You're scaring me," Victoria said. "The Richard Mitchell I know doesn't talk about what really matters. He talks about bottom lines and market share." "Maybe it's time you met the real Richard Mitchell," he replied, surprising himself. "Give me 20 minutes." He ended the call just as Sarah emerged from the bathroom. She'd found a simple navy sheath dress that fit her remarkably well, though she'd kept her own sensible shoes. With her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, she looked nothing like the housekeeper who had entered the building, but very much like the young woman Richard remembered from 9 years ago. "Better," he said appreciatively. "There's a secure lounge through that door. You'll be comfortable there while I deal with the board." "We're staying here?" Sarah asked incredulously. "It's the safest place in the building right now," Richard replied. And Emma was right. "No. Someone inside my company is working with Apex. Until I know who's involved, I want you both where no one can reach you." Emma had wandered to his desk and was studying his computer setup with interest. "Triple monitor configuration with quantum encryption protocols," she observed. "Impressive. But your network infrastructure has vulnerabilities." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Does it now?" "Mm-hmm. Your system administrator allows remote access through a backdoor port. I noticed it when I researched your company's security architecture." "Emma?" Sarah exclaimed, mortified. "You didn't hack—" "Not hacking, Mom, just exploring." Emma's expression was all innocence. "I never breached any actual systems. That would be illegal." Despite the gravity of the situation, Richard felt a surge of pride. "We'll discuss your explorations later. For now, I need you both to stay here and touch nothing. Except maybe your security protocols," Emma suggested earnestly. "I could really help." "Emma," Sarah warned. Richard checked his watch. The board wouldn't wait much longer. "I'll send Marcus up to guard the door. No one enters except me, understood?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Richard. If Emma's right about someone inside your company working against you, I've dealt with corporate traitors before," he said grimly. "This won't be the first time." "But it's the first time with so much at stake," Emma said quietly, her eyes meeting his with startling intensity. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps of how quickly their lives had intertwined in just a few short hours. Richard found himself nodding solemnly to his daughter. "I'll keep that in mind." 10 minutes later, Richard strode into the boardroom on the 58th floor, every inch the commanding CEO. The tension in the room was palpable, his board members seated along one side of the massive mahogany table, Apex representatives along the other, and his executive team at the far end. James Taylor, his CFO of 8 years, rose immediately. "Richard, thank God, we've been trying to reach you all afternoon." Richard ignored him, scanning the room carefully. Charles Montgomery, Apex's silver-haired CEO, watched him with the cool assessment of a chess grandmaster. Beside him sat Apex's legal team, documents spread before them. And at the head of the table, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Victoria Hughes, Mitchell Innovations' chief counsel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, remaining standing as a subtle power play, "I apologize for the delay. I've been addressing a rather serious security breach." Murmurs rippled through the room. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew him well enough to sense something was different. "What kind of breach?" demanded Harold Freeman, the eldest board member. "The kind where someone attempts to steal the company from under us," Richard replied evenly. He nodded to his assistant, who had followed him in. "Distribute the documents, please." The young woman handed thick folders to each person at the table. Richard waited until everyone had opened them before continuing. "What you're looking at is an analysis of the hidden provisions in the Apex merger agreement, specifically clauses designed to transfer controlling interest of our neural network patents to an offshore subsidiary within 18 months of signing." Shocked exclamations erupted from the board members. The Apex lawyers exchanged glances, while Charles Montgomery remained impassively silent. James Taylor's face had drained of color. "Richard, this is absurd. Our legal team has vetted this contract exhaustively." "Apparently not exhaustively enough," Richard cut in coldly. "Or perhaps they were instructed not to look too closely at certain sections." Victoria was flipping through the pages with increasing alarm. "This analysis? Richard, where did this come from? I've been over this contract a dozen times." "Let's just say I received some unexpected expertise," Richard replied, thinking of Emma's precocious intelligence. "The point is, this merger was never intended as a partnership. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a friendly acquisition." Charles Montgomery finally spoke, his cultivated British accent adding gravitas to his words. "These are serious accusations, Richard, potentially libelous ones." "They're also entirely accurate," Richard replied. He turned to the board. "I've already instructed our legal department to prepare a formal response rejecting the merger on the grounds of bad faith negotiation and attempted corporate espionage." One of the Apex lawyers stood. "Mr. Mitchell, we have a binding letter of intent signed by both parties. Withdrawing now constitutes breach of contract. We'll have no choice but to pursue significant damages." Richard smiled thinly. "Pursue away. Contract obtained through deliberate deception won't hold up in any court. But please waste your money on litigation. It will give me time to investigate how Apex obtained such detailed internal knowledge of our patent architecture." James Taylor was visibly sweating now. "Richard, you're making a catastrophic mistake. This merger is essential for our future growth." "Your concern is noted, James," Richard interrupted, "though I find it interesting that you're more worried about Apex's position than our own company's." The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Several board members glanced at James with new suspicion. Charles Montgomery closed his folder with deliberate calm. "I think we've heard enough. Clearly Mitchell Innovations is experiencing some internal confusion. Perhaps it would be best to adjourn until cooler heads prevail." "Or perhaps," Richard suggested, "you should return to your board and explain how your attempted corporate theft was discovered before the ink dried on the contract." Montgomery's composed facade cracked slightly. "You're making a powerful enemy, Richard. I've been making enemies my entire career, Charles. The difference is I'm still standing while they're footnotes in business history." Richard's voice was glacial. "You have 1 hour to remove your team from my building." As the Apex contingent gathered their materials in stony silence, Richard turned to his board. "Emergency session, my office, 15 minutes. Victoria, I need you immediately." Without waiting for a response, he strode from the room, Victoria hurrying to catch up. James Taylor started to follow, but Richard turned, fixing him with a stare that stopped him in his tracks. Not you, James. I think you've done quite enough already. In the privacy of the elevator, Victoria finally exploded. Richard, what the hell is going on? Yesterday you were championing this merger like the second coming, and now you're declaring war on Apex. And what was that with James? James has been feeding information to Apex for months, Richard said flatly as the elevator ascended. Possibly years. That's a serious accusation without proof. Oh, I'll get proof, Richard assured her, starting with a complete audit of his communications and financial records. The elevator doors opened to Richard's executive floor. As they walked toward his office, Victoria grabbed his arm. Richard, stop. This isn't like you. You're acting impulsively, emotionally. Perhaps it's exactly like me, Richard countered. Perhaps this is the first time in years I've seen things with complete clarity. Victoria studied his face. What happened today? Something changed you. Richard hesitated, then made a decision. Come with me. There's someone you need to meet. When they entered the private suite, they found Emma and Sarah in the lounge area. Emma was rapidly typing on her tablet, while Sarah paced nervously by the windows. Richard, Sarah exclaimed. What happened? Is everything? She broke off when she noticed Victoria, instinctively moving closer to Emma. Victoria looked between the three of them, her sharp legal mind clearly connecting dots at rapid speed. Her eyes widened as they settled on Emma's face, noting the unmistakable resemblance to Richard. Victoria Hughes, this is Sarah Reynolds, Richard said formally, and her daughter Emma. My daughter, he added, the words still strange on his tongue. Our daughter. Victoria's professional composure slipped for the first time in their 15-year working relationship. When did you... How? Today, Richard answered the incomplete question. I just found out today. I found him, Emma corrected, not looking up from her tablet. And I found the contract trap too. Victoria's gaze snapped to the child. You found the hidden clauses? How could you possibly... She's 9 years old and she reads contract law for fun, Richard explained, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Apparently she's been following my career for years. Research, Emma corrected matter-of-factly. Reconnaissance is essential before making first contact. Victoria looked like she needed to sit down. Richard, this changes everything. Yes, Richard agreed simply. It does. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus outside. Board members arriving. James Taylor attempting to join them. Richard's expression hardened. I need to address the board. Victoria, stay with them, please. Of course, Victoria agreed, still looking shell-shocked. As Richard turned to leave, Emma called out, Dad! The word still gave him pause. Check James Taylor's offshore accounts in the Caymans. He's been receiving regular payments through a shell corporation called Helios Ventures. Richard and Victoria stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Victoria demanded. Emma's smile was disconcertingly similar to Richard's own expression when he'd outmaneuvered a competitor. I may have done more than just explore your systems. Emma, Sarah exclaimed. Mom, it was important, Emma insisted. I needed to know who was trying to hurt Dad's company. Richard should have been angry at the admission of what was essentially corporate espionage, albeit conducted by a 9-year-old. Instead, he felt that same surge of pride, mixed with something deeper, a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced before. We'll discuss your methods later, he said firmly. For now, stay here with Victoria. As he left the suite, Richard heard Victoria ask incredulously, Did you really hack Mitchell Innovations? Not hacked, Emma's voice replied patiently. I just found the open doors nobody bothered to close. Richard smiled grimly as the door sealed behind him. Charles Montgomery and James Taylor had no idea what they were up against. Not just Richard Mitchell, the CEO, but the unexpected power of a father protecting his newfound family. They were about to learn that some forces in this world were stronger than corporate greed or personal ambition. And as he prepared to face his board, Richard realized he was finally fighting for something that truly mattered. Not market share or stock prices, but a future where he could be the father he never had himself. A future that had appeared out of nowhere and suddenly meant everything. The battle for Mitchell Innovations was just beginning, but for the first time in his life, Richard Mitchell was fighting for much more than just his company. The emergency board meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the time Richard returned to his private suite, the San Francisco skyline was aglow with evening lights. the bay a canvas of reflected gold and purple from the setting sun. He found Victoria sitting with Emma, both hunched over his workstation reviewing financial documents, while Sarah dozed on the leather sofa. "The board is satisfied," Richard announced, his voice rousing Sarah. "For now." Victoria looked up, her expression grim. Emma's information about James was accurate. "We found substantial evidence of payments from Helios Ventures, which appears to be a subsidiary of another shell company ultimately controlled by Apex." "You believe me?" Emma asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "I had our security team investigate," Richard corrected, but his slight smile betrayed his pride. "James has been suspended pending a full investigation. He left the building under security escort 20 minutes ago." Sarah stood, smoothing down her borrowed dress. "So it's over?" "Hardly." Richard moved to the bar in the corner and poured himself a scotch. "Apex will regroup. They've invested too much in this attempted takeover to simply walk away. And James isn't their only inside source, I'm certain of it." "The timing is too perfect," Emma agreed, spinning in Richard's ergonomic chair. "They knew exactly when to approach you with the merger, right after your neural network patents were approved." Richard nodded grimly. "Which means we still have a leak somewhere. What happens now?" Sarah asked, looking uncomfortable as the corporate intrigue swirled around her. "Now we go to my house," Richard said firmly. "It's been a long day and we all need rest before tomorrow's battle." Victoria gathered her files. "I'll have digital forensics working through the night on James's communications. If there are other conspirators, we'll find them." "Keep me updated," Richard instructed. "And Victoria, thank you for today. I know this has all been unexpected." Victoria's eyes drifted to Emma, who was now examining the advanced security controls on Richard's desk with unabashed interest. "Unexpected is an understatement," she replied dryly. "But I have to admit your daughter is remarkable." The word daughter still gave Richard pause, a jolt of recognition, wonder, and lingering disbelief. "Yes," he agreed simply, "she is." 30 minutes later, Richard's autonomous Tesla was winding its way up the steep hills of Pacific Heights toward his home. Emma pressed against the window, watching the glittering city fall away below them. "Your house is in the most expensive neighborhood in San Francisco," she observed matter-of-factly. "Average property value, $12 million. Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Emma, please!" "It's just data, Mom," Emma replied innocently. "I like data." Richard glanced at them in the rearview mirror. "The house belonged to my mother. I renovated it after she passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry about your mother," Sarah said quietly. "She raised you well, Richard." He met her eyes briefly in the mirror. "Did she? I'm not so sure." The car turned through massive iron gates that opened automatically at their approach. Richard's home was a modernized Victorian, its classic facade preserved, while the interior had been completely transformed into a showcase of contemporary design and technology. Unlike many tech billionaires, he preferred the city to the sprawling compounds of Woodside or Atherton, valuing proximity to his company over excessive space. "It's beautiful," Sarah murmured as they pulled up to the entrance. "It's a fortress," Emma corrected, pointing to the discreet security features she'd already spotted. "Biometric access, motion sensors, bulletproof glass in the front windows?" Richard raised an eyebrow as he helped them from the car. "You have a good eye. I read your security company's marketing materials," Emma explained. "They use your house as a case study for their premium services. They probably shouldn't do that." "No," Richard agreed, making a mental note to have a pointed conversation with his security provider. "They probably shouldn't." Inside, the house was minimalist and elegant, all clean lines, neutral tones and carefully curated art. Like his office, it revealed little of Richard himself beyond impeccable taste and significant wealth. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, nothing to suggest the house was more than an upscale hotel suite. "Lisa," Richard called out as they entered, "I have guests staying tonight." A disembodied female voice responded from hidden speakers. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. How many guests shall I prepare accommodations for?" "2," he replied, "in the East Wing guest suites." "Very well. Dinner service will be ready in 30 minutes. Sarah looked around warily. "Who's Lisa?" "My home AI system," Richard explained. "She manages the house." Emma's eyes had gone wide with excitement. A fully integrated smart home system With adaptive learning capabilities? Is she running on your proprietary neural network architecture? Richard nodded, secretly pleased by her enthusiasm. An early prototype. She's quite limited compared to our commercial versions. Can I see her code? Emma asked immediately. Emma, Sarah admonished, we've been here less than 5 minutes. Richard surprised himself by laughing. It's all right. Her curiosity is familiar. He gestured toward the sweeping staircase. Let me show you to your rooms. You can get settled before dinner. The guest wing was as immaculately designed as the rest of the house, with 2 adjoining suites connected by a shared sitting room. Emma immediately claimed the room with the best view of the bay, dropping her backpack on the king-sized bed that dwarfed her small frame. This is bigger than our entire apartment, she observed without judgment. Sarah lingered in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable. Richard sensed her unease, the strange intimacy of being in his home after 9 years of deliberate distance, the imbalance of power their different circumstances created. Sarah, he said quietly, stepping back to give her space, I know this is all happening very fast. I'm not trying to complicate your lives. She looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. Aren't you? What exactly is your plan here, Richard? We discover you have a daughter, stay in your mansion for a night or 2, and then what? You write some checks and we go back to our lives with occasional weekend visits. The question hung between them, fraught with implications neither was ready to address. Before Richard could formulate a response, Emma called from inside the room, having already powered up the room's integrated tablet. Dad, your home network has the same vulnerability as your office system. Want me to fix it? Don't touch anything, Emma, Richard called back, grateful for the interruption. To Sarah, he said more softly, we'll talk after dinner, I promise. Dinner was an oddly domestic affair in Richard's sleek dining room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The meal was prepared and served by Lisa via automated systems, a technological marvel that Emma peppered with questions throughout the meal. So the food is cooked by robotic systems? She asked, watching in fascination as a mechanical arm precisely positioned a slice of sourdough on her plate. Semi-automated, Richard corrected. The prep chef comes in morning and evening to prepare ingredients and program the menus. The system handles the actual cooking and service. Seems lonely, Sarah commented, sipping her water. She'd declined the wine Richard offered. Richard paused, fork midway to his mouth. I'm rarely home, he said after a moment. And when I am, I'm usually working. No girlfriend? Emma asked with the direct curiosity only children can get away with. Boyfriend? Partner of any kind? Emma! Sarah exclaimed. Richard shook his head, his lips twitching in amusement. No time for relationships. The company has always come first. That sounds lonely too, Emma observed, returning to her salmon. The simple statement, delivered without judgment, struck Richard more deeply than he expected. Was he lonely? He'd never thought of his solitary existence in those terms. It was simply the price of success, the necessary sacrifice for building an empire. Tell me about your school, he said to Emma, changing the subject. Your mother mentioned you're in a gifted program. Emma brightened, launching into a detailed assessment of her school's inadequate STEM curriculum and how she supplemented it with online university courses. Richard listened with growing amazement as she described her self-directed studies in programming, mathematics, and apparently corporate law. She's already completed most of the freshman computer science curriculum at Berkeley, Sarah added quietly, a hint of pride breaking through her reserve. The school doesn't know what to do with her half the time. Have you considered specialized schools? Richard asked. There are several academies for exceptionally gifted children in the Bay Area. Sarah's expression tightened. On a housekeeper's salary? Besides, those schools require parental connections or donations to even get an interview. The rebuke was gentle but clear. Richard nodded, accepting it, of course. I wasn't thinking. I've applied for scholarships, Emma interjected matter-of-factly, but most of them are for high school students. I've been teaching myself from OpenCourseWare and hacking into university servers to access premium content. Emma, Sarah exclaimed. Allegedly hacking. Emma corrected herself with a faint smile. Richard couldn't suppress a laugh. You're going to get yourself arrested before you're 12 at this rate. Only if I get caught, Emma replied cheerfully. The easy banter continued through dinner, and Richard found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. Emma's precocious intellect and Sarah's quiet strength created a dynamic he'd never experienced in his carefully controlled life. For a man accustomed to boardroom battles and billion-dollar negotiations, this simple family dinner felt like uncharted territory, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After dinner, Sarah insisted on helping clear the dishes despite the automated systems, her ingrained work ethic overriding her status as a guest. When Emma began to yawn, Sarah firmly directed her toward bed, overruling her protests about wanting to explore Richard's home technology further. "Tomorrow," Sarah promised, exchanging a glance with Richard that conveyed both a request for permission and an assertion of her parental authority. "Of course," he agreed quickly. "My systems aren't going anywhere." Emma reluctantly bid them goodnight, pausing awkwardly before Richard. There was a moment of uncertain protocol. What was the appropriate way to say goodnight to a father you'd met only hours ago? Richard solved the dilemma by gently squeezing her shoulder. "Sleep well, Emma, and thank you for everything today," she nodded solemnly. "Night, Dad." After she'd gone upstairs, Richard led Sarah to his study, a warm contrast to the minimalist design of the rest of the house, with leather-bound books lining the walls and a fireplace that Lisa had already lit upon their approach. "Would you like a drink now?" he offered, moving to a discreet bar cabinet. Sarah nodded, her composure finally beginning to crack. "God, yes. Whiskey, if you have it." Richard poured them each 2 fingers of an aged single malt and handed her a glass. She took a substantial sip, closing her eyes briefly as the liquor burned a path to her stomach. "She's an extraordinary child, Sarah," Richard said quietly, settling into a leather chair across from her. "You've done an amazing job raising her." "I had no choice," Sarah replied, staring into her glass. "She was different from the beginning. So alert, so aware. By the time she was 3, I knew she was exceptional. By 5, she was reading at a high school level. I've been running to keep up ever since. It can't have been easy, especially alone." Sarah's gaze lifted to his, a flash of the old anger surfacing. "Are you asking for my forgiveness, Richard? For not being there?" "No," he answered honestly. "You kept her from me. That was your choice. A choice I made because I saw no other option," Sarah countered, her voice rising slightly. "You were Richard Mitchell, tech wunderkind on his way to becoming a billionaire. I was the summer housekeeper you slept with a few times at your Lake Tahoe property. What exactly was I supposed to think would happen?" Richard leaned forward. "You could have given me the chance to decide that for myself." "And what would you have decided?" Sarah challenged. 9 years ago, would you have welcomed a child into your life? Would you have wanted to co-parent with someone so far outside your social circle? Be honest, Richard." The question forced him to confront truths about himself he'd never examined. 9 years ago, he'd been wholly consumed with building Mitchell Innovations, working 100-hour weeks, sacrificing everything for his vision. A child, especially one with a woman he barely knew, would have been seen as a complication at best, a disaster at worst. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I'd like to think I would have done the right thing." "The right thing," Sarah repeated flatly. "Writing checks, setting up a trust fund, scheduled visitations when your calendar allowed." Richard flinched at the accuracy of her assessment. Perhaps. At first, he met her gaze directly, but meeting her now, knowing her even for these few hours, I can't imagine not having her in my life. The raw honesty in his voice seemed to reach Sarah. Her expression softened. "She's been asking about you more and more lately. I think she sensed something was missing. She's always been able to see through pretenses, even mine. She has my analytical mind," Richard observed. "But her heart, her compassion, her emotional intelligence, that comes from you." Sarah's smile was tinged with sadness. "We've been a team, Emma and I, just the 2 of us against the world. And now?" Richard asked carefully. Sarah set down her glass with deliberate calm. "Now I don't know. Everything's changed in a single day. You've discovered you have a daughter. My daughter has found her father. You're afraid of losing her," Richard finished, understanding dawning. "Of being replaced, wouldn't you be?" Sarah challenged. "You can give her everything I never could. Education, opportunities, financial security. The kind of life I've worked myself to exhaustion, trying to provide even a fraction of." I can't replace 9 years of love and sacrifice, Richard said quietly. No amount of money or privilege can do that. Sarah studied him, searching for sincerity. What do you want from this, Richard, truly? It was the fundamental question, one he'd been asking himself since the moment Emma had walked into his office. What did he want? Partial custody? Weekends and holidays? Or something more comprehensive, more permanent? I want to know my daughter, he said finally. I want to be part of her life, a real part, not just financially. And I want... He hesitated, then pressed forward. I want to make things right for you too, Sarah. For both of you. Make things right, Sarah repeated, her tone guarded. What does that mean exactly? Before Richard could elaborate, his phone buzzed urgently. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. He frowned. It was nearly 11 p.m. I need to take this, he apologized, answering the call. Victoria, what's happened? Her voice was tense. Richard, we have a serious problem. James Taylor emptied his office before security arrived. He took files, physical files that weren't part of our digital system, and he's disappeared. Richard's blood ran cold. What kind of files? We're not sure yet, but his assistant mentioned something about the Special Projects Cabinet. Richard? Victoria hesitated. Security just found a listening device in your primary conference room. It appears to have been there for months. Richard glanced at Sarah, who was watching his face with growing concern. Increase security at all facilities immediately and send a team to my house. Already done, Victoria assured him. But there's more. Apex just released a press statement announcing a strategic partnership with Elysium Technologies. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. Elysium was Mitchell Innovation's chief rival in the neural network space, a smaller but aggressive company known for its cutthroat tactics. They're moving to Plan B, he realized aloud. If they can't take us over, they'll try to destroy us from the outside. Richard, be careful, Victoria warned. This is escalating faster than we anticipated. And with James in the wind with sensitive information. I understand. Richard ended the call and turned to Sarah, his expression grim. We have a problem. Sarah set down her glass. I heard enough. Your former CFO has disappeared with company secrets, and now your competitors are aligning against you. Yes, Richard stood, already mentally calculating his next moves. I need to deal with this. Of course you do, Sarah said, rising as well. Your company comes first. It always has. The comment stopped him. He turned back to her, suddenly seeing the situation through her eyes. Here was confirmation of exactly what she'd feared 9 years ago. At the first sign of corporate trouble, Richard Mitchell would choose his company over everything else. No, he said firmly. Not this time. James and Apex and whoever else is involved. They're coming after me because they think they know me. They think they know what matters to me, what I'll sacrifice to protect my company. Sarah's expression was guarded. And what will you sacrifice? Not you, Richard said, his voice low and intense. Not Emma. Never again. The conviction in his voice seemed to reach something in Sarah. Her defensive posture softened slightly. What are you going to do? Richard moved to a painting on the wall, a Rothko his mother had loved. He swung it aside to reveal a hidden safe, which he quickly opened. First, I'm going to ensure you're both protected, he said, retrieving a small device. This is a panic button keyed to my private security team. Keep it with you at all times. Sarah accepted it reluctantly. You really think we're in danger? I think James Taylor and Apex were willing to commit corporate espionage to get what they wanted. I'm not taking chances with your safety, either of you. He closed the safe and replaced the painting. Tomorrow, I'm taking you both somewhere secure while I deal with this situation. We can go back to our apartment. Absolutely not, Richard cut her off. If they know about Emma, and the contract clause suggests they do, your apartment isn't safe. Sarah's eyes widened with genuine fear for the first time. You really think they would? I don't know what they would do, Richard admitted. That's why I'm not taking any chances. He reached out, hesitantly placing a hand on her shoulder. I know you've been protecting Emma on your own for 9 years. Sarah, let me help protect her now, please. The word please seemed to surprise her coming from Richard Mitchell, a man famous for giving orders rather than making requests. She searched his face, looking for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or genuine concern beyond self-interest. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "All right. For Emma's sake." "Thank you," Richard said quietly, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. They stood together in the warm glow of the fireplace, two people who had created a remarkable child, but remained strangers to each other, now bound by common purpose and shared concern. Upstairs, unknown to either of them, Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, tablet in hand, having bypassed Richard's home security system with embarrassing ease. On her screen, she watched the financial records of James Taylor's recently emptied accounts, tracking the electronic trail as it moved through a series of offshore banks. "Gotcha," she whispered, as the final transfer landed in an account registered to a name she recognized from her earlier investigations. Charles Montgomery, CEO of Apex Global, and the corporate chess. Match had indeed begun, but neither side yet realized that the most formidable player might be a 9-year-old girl with her father's analytical brilliance and her mother's quiet determination. Dawn broke over Sunny Francisco Bay in a spectacular display of pinks and golds, illuminating the fog that clung to the city like a protective blanket. Richard had been awake for hours, managing the corporate crisis via secure channels from his home office. Security teams had been dispatched, emergency protocols activated, and a carefully crafted press release prepared to counter Apex's moves. By 6 a.m., he had already spoken with each board member individually, assuring them that the situation was under control despite James Taylor's betrayal. By 7, he had coordinated with Victoria to initiate their counteroffensive, a temporary restraining order against Apex and Elysium to prevent them from utilizing any proprietary Mitchell Innovations technology. At precisely 7:30, he found Emma already awake in the kitchen, her tablet propped against a cereal box as she scrolled through what appeared to be financial documents. "Good morning," Richard said, momentarily disoriented by the domestic scene in his usually empty kitchen. "You're up early." Emma looked up, her expression serious. "I found something you should see." Richard poured himself coffee from the automated machine and sat beside her. "What is it?" "James Taylor's money trail." She turned the tablet toward him. "He emptied his accounts last night and transferred everything through a series of shell companies. But I tracked the final destination." She pointed to a highlighted transaction. "This account in the Cayman Islands belongs to Charles Montgomery." Richard nearly choked on his coffee. "Emma, how did you get this information?" "This is highly protected financial data." She shrugged nonchalantly. "Banking security is surprisingly weak if you know where to look. And I found the passwords in Mr. Taylor's cloud backup. This is extremely illegal," Richard said carefully. "Only if we use it improperly," Emma countered reasonably. "But it proves the connection between your CFO and Apex. Mr. Taylor wasn't just sharing information, he was being directly paid by the CEO." Despite the severity of the situation, Richard couldn't help a surge of pride at his daughter's ingenuity. "Emma, while I'm impressed by your skills, and I truly am, we need to discuss boundaries and legal considerations." "Later," Emma said, continuing to swipe through documents. "There's more. I found communications between Taylor and someone else inside Mitchell Innovations, someone still there. They used an encrypted messaging app, but the backups weren't properly secured." Richard leaned forward. "Who?" "Andrew Parker," Emma replied. "Your head of product development." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Andrew had been with the company for over a decade, one of his most trusted executives, and the lead architect on their neural network patents. "That's not possible," Richard said automatically. "Andrew helped build this company from the ground up." "People change," came Sarah's voice from the doorway. She stood watching them, already dressed in her own clothes from the small bag they'd retrieved from her apartment. "Especially when money's involved." Richard turned to her. "Good morning. Did you sleep?" "A little." She moved to the coffee machine, studying its complex interface with a frown. "How does this work?" "Lisa," Richard called. "Coffee for Ms. Reynolds, please." The machine immediately whirred to life. Sarah accepted the resulting cup with a wary nod. "So what's the plan for today? Are we hiding here while you save your company?" "No," Richard replied, closing Emma's tablet despite her protests. "We're leaving the city." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Leaving?" To go where? My property in Sonoma. It's remote, secure, and not widely known. Richard checked his watch. The helicopter will be here in 30 minutes. Helicopter? Emma perked up immediately. We're taking a helicopter? That's safer than driving, Richard explained. And faster. I've arranged for private security to meet us there. Sarah set down her cup with deliberate calm. Richard, this is starting to feel like an action movie. Are we really in that much danger? Richard met her gaze directly. I don't know. That's the problem. James Taylor had access to virtually all of Mitchell Innovations' proprietary information, including my personal files. If he's truly working with Apex and they've recruited others like Andrew, we need to assume the worst. And what exactly is the worst? Sarah pressed. Richard hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was watching their exchange with keen attention. Corporate espionage can involve substantial financial crimes, he said carefully. People who commit those crimes sometimes become desperate when exposed. Criminals get dangerous when cornered, Emma translated bluntly. They might try to harm us to pressure Dad. Sarah paled slightly. Emma, please go get dressed. Pack everything you brought. For once, Emma didn't argue, leaving her tablet behind as she hurried upstairs. When she was out of earshot, Sarah stepped closer to Richard, her voice low and intense. Be straight with me. Are they really likely to come after her? After us? Probably not, Richard admitted. This is primarily about corporate assets, but you have enemies, Sarah finished. Powerful ones. And now they know your greatest vulnerability. Richard couldn't deny it. The discovery of Emma's existence had changed everything, not just personally, but strategically. Anyone looking to control or destroy Richard Mitchell now had a leverage point they'd never had before. I won't let anything happen to either of you, he promised. Sarah's laugh held no humor. That's not entirely up to you, is it? She ran a hand through her hair in frustration. I kept her safe for 9 years, Richard. 9 years of ordinary, anonymous life. And in less than 24 hours with you, we're fleeing the city in a helicopter with private security. The accusation stung precisely because it was justified. I'm sorry, Richard said quietly. I never meant for this to happen. Sarah's anger deflated slightly. I know. Neither of us planned any of this. She sighed, looking suddenly exhausted. I should pack. As she turned to go, Richard called after her, Sarah. She paused, looking back. Thank you. For trusting me with this. A complicated expression crossed her face. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps acceptance. She nodded once before heading upstairs. Left alone, Richard retrieved Emma's tablet, examining the financial trails she'd uncovered. The evidence was damning and completely inadmissible in court due to how it had been obtained. Still, knowing the connection between Montgomery and Taylor gave him a strategic advantage, and the revelation about Andrew Parker required immediate attention. He called Victoria on a secure line. Andrew Parker is compromised, he said without preamble. Have security escort him from the building immediately. Full lockout protocols. Victoria didn't waste time asking for explanations. The TRO against Apex has been filed. Emergency board meeting set for 3 p.m. via secure channel. What's your status? Taking my family to the Sonoma property, Richard replied, the word family still strange on his tongue. I'll join the board meeting remotely. Have my security team sweep the helicopter before departure. Already done, Victoria assured him. Richard, be careful. This is moving faster than any of us expected. I'll be in touch. Richard ended the call and turned to find Emma watching him from the doorway. You're having Mr. Parker removed from the company, she stated, rather than asked. You shouldn't eavesdrop. Richard chided gently. It's not eavesdropping. It's information gathering. Emma corrected, moving to retrieve her tablet. I've been reading about corporate takeover strategies. This is a classic pincer movement, attack from inside and outside simultaneously. Richard studied his daughter, continually astonished by her precociousness. Most 9-year-olds read Harry Potter, not corporate warfare tactics. I read those too, Emma replied with a faint smile. The lessons are surprisingly similar. Power struggles, loyalty, betrayal. It's all the same dynamics, just with different stakes. A chime from Richard's phone alerted him that the helicopter was approaching. Time to go, he said, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. Are you afraid of flying? She looked at him, as if he'd asked if she was afraid of butterflies. Of course not. Statistically, helicopters are significantly safer than cars on a per-trip basis, though more dangerous on a per-hour basis. But given the short duration of our flight, the risk assessment favors the helicopter. Richard couldn't suppress his laugh. Of course. How foolish of me to ask. Sarah joined them, a small bag in hand. She'd changed into jeans and a simple sweater, practical clothes for their destination. She gave Emma a once-over, straightening her daughter's collar in an automatic maternal gesture. "Ready?" Richard asked them both. Sarah's smile was tight but determined. "Do we have a choice?" "There are always choices," Richard replied seriously. "But some are better than others." The sleek black helicopter landed precisely on the marked helipad on Richard's rooftop deck. The pilot, a former military man named Collins who had worked for Richard for years, helped them board efficiently. Within minutes they were airborne, the magnificent panorama of San Francisco falling away beneath them. Emma pressed against the window in undisguised delight, pointing out landmarks and reciting facts about various buildings as they passed. Sarah sat rigidly beside her, one hand gripping the seatbelt, the other clasping her daughter's hand. "First time in a helicopter?" Richard asked over the headset. Sarah nodded tightly. "First time in a private anything." The flight to Sonoma took less than 30 minutes. Richard's property came into view. 100 acres of vineyards surrounding a modern glass and stone residence, nestled against the base of a wooded hillside. Unlike his city home, the Sonoma house was warm and inviting, designed as a retreat rather than a showcase. "You have a vineyard?" Emma exclaimed, delighted. "Do you make wine?" "The property does," Richard corrected. "I purchased the grapes from a local vintner who maintains the vines. I'm rarely here to enjoy it." A sleek black SUV waited for them as the helicopter touched down on a pad near the main house. Two men in discreet security attire approached as Collins shut down the rotors. "Mr. Mitchell," the taller one greeted him. "The property is secure. We've established a perimeter as requested." "Thank you, Dawson." Richard helped Sarah from the helicopter. "Any updates from the city?" Ms. Hughes called. Andrew Parker resisted security's escort. "There was an incident." Richard tensed. "What kind of incident?" "He attempted to access the secure servers before leaving. When prevented, he became physically aggressive. He's been detained by SFPD. Were there any injuries?" Richard asked sharply. "Minor ones only, sir. But Ms. Hughes suggests it indicates a higher level of desperation than anticipated." Sarah moved closer to Emma instinctively, her earlier fears clearly justified by this news. Richard nodded grimly. "Double the security detail. No one approaches the property without my explicit authorization." "Already done, sir?" The main house welcomed them with soaring ceilings and walls of glass that showcased the vineyards and mountains beyond. Unlike the sterile modernity of Richard's city home, this space was designed for comfort, plush furnishings, warm woods, and a massive stone fireplace dominating the great room. "This is amazing," Emma breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the view. "There's a pool behind the house and hiking trails through the vineyard," Richard offered. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Make yourselves at home." Sarah stood in the center of the great room looking slightly lost. "How long do you expect us to stay here?" "A few days at most," Richard assured her. "Just until we've contained the situation in the city." "I have shifts at the hospital," Sarah reminded him. "And Emma has school." "I've already arranged for your work absences," Richard said. "Family emergency leave. As for school," he glanced at Emma, who was already exploring the house's integrated technology system. "I think she can afford to miss a few days." Sarah moved closer, lowering her voice. "You can't just rearrange our lives like this, Richard. I appreciate your concern for our safety, but nothing," Richard interrupted, his voice equally low but intense. "This isn't about control, Sarah. It's about protection. James Taylor and his associates have shown they're willing to break the law to get what they want. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, I need to know you're both safe." Their standoff was interrupted by Emma's excited voice from across the room. "Dad, your security system here has the same backdoor vulnerability. Want me to patch it?" Richard broke eye contact with Sarah, the tension between them unresolved. "Not now, Emma. Why don't you explore the grounds? There's a garden on the east side of the house that your grandmother designed." The mention of her unknown grandmother immediately diverted Emma's attention. Really, did she like plants? What was her favorite flower? Do you have pictures of her? The rapid-fire questions caught Richard off guard. She loved gardening. Roses, I believe. And yes, there are photos in the study. Emma darted off immediately, leaving Richard and Sarah alone again. She deserves to know her family history, Sarah said quietly. All of it? Yes, Richard agreed. She does. He hesitated, then added, as do I. Sarah nodded, understanding his meaning. What do you want to know? Everything, Richard said simply. Her first words. When she walked, her favorite books, the 9 years I missed. Something in Sarah's expression softened. That might take a while. We have time, Richard replied, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area by the windows. While Emma explores, for the next hour, as Emma investigated the property with the boundless energy of childhood, Richard and Sarah sat by the fireplace, bridging 9 years of separation with stories of their daughter's life. Sarah spoke of Emma's precocious development, reading at 3, programming simple games at 5, hacking her school's computer system at 7, just to prove she could, Sarah added ruefully. Richard listened with rapt attention, grief and pride mingling as he absorbed these precious details of a life he should have been part of. Sarah, for her part, seemed to relax marginally as she shared these memories, perhaps recognizing Richard's genuine interest in knowing their daughter. She asked about you constantly, Sarah admitted, from the time she could form sentences. I never lied to her, but I didn't tell her everything either. Just that you were a successful businessman who didn't know about her. Did she resent me? Richard asked quietly, dreading the answer. Sarah considered this. No, I don't think so. She was curious mainly, determined to understand why her family was different from others. She's always been remarkably pragmatic about it. Like when she decided it was time to meet me and simply showed up at my office, Richard observed with a slight smile. Exactly like that, Sarah agreed. Once Emma makes up her mind about something, there's no stopping her. She gets that from both of us, Richard noted. Their conversation was interrupted by the secure phone in Richard's pocket. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. I need to take this, he apologized, rising. The board meeting will be starting soon. Sarah nodded, standing as well. I'll check on Emma. Richard answered the call as Sarah left the room. Victoria, what's happening? It's worse than we thought. Victoria's voice was tense. Andrew Parker had access to the neural network architecture. All of it. And we've confirmed he copied the entire codebase before we locked him out. Richard's blood ran cold. The core algorithms? Everything. And there's more. Apex has filed an emergency injunction claiming we stole their proprietary technology. They're attempting to freeze all our assets pending investigation. That's absurd, Richard snapped, for they're trying to flip the narrative. Exactly. But they've got a sympathetic judge, Judge Harrison. Senator Harrison's brother, Richard realized grimly. The family Emma's mother works for. This is no coincidence. None of it is, Victoria agreed. Richard, they're moving with a coordination that suggests this plan has been in place for months, perhaps years. They were waiting for the perfect moment. Richard moved to the windows, watching as Emma and Sarah explored the rose garden below. His daughter was gesturing animatedly about something. While Sarah listened with that patient attention, Richard was beginning to recognize as her signature parenting style. They think they've found my weakness, he said quietly. They think I'll capitulate to protect Emma and Sarah. Will you? Victoria asked bluntly. The question hung in the air. A week ago, even a day ago, Richard Mitchell would have sacrificed anything and anyone to protect Mitchell Innovations. The company had been his life, his purpose, his legacy. But now, watching his newfound daughter's animated expression as she discovered her grandmother's roses, Richard felt a seismic shift in his priorities. No, he said finally. But not for the reasons they expect. I won't sacrifice my company to protect my family. And I won't sacrifice my family to protect my company. We find another way. What other way, Richard? They have our technology, corrupt judicial connections, and knowledge of your personal vulnerability. What's our play here? Richard's mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, counter-strategies. We go public, he said abruptly. With everything. What? Victoria sounded shocked. Richard, The last thing they expect, he finished. Apex and their allies are counting on my desire for privacy, for control. They're expecting me to handle this in the shadows, through traditional corporate warfare. So we changed the battlefield entirely. He outlined his plan quickly, watching as Emma stooped to examine a particularly vibrant red rose below. The sunlight caught her chestnut hair, so like his own at that age, and something fierce and protective swelled in his chest. It's incredibly risky, Victoria warned when he finished explaining. The board may not approve. Then I'll remind them who founded this company, Richard replied with steel in his voice. Have everything ready for the meeting. I'll be joining remotely in 30 minutes. He ended the call and stood watching his family for a moment longer. 9 years ago, he had made a choice, or rather the choice had been made for him, that set them all on separate paths. Now those paths had converged again, bringing both danger and opportunity. Richard Mitchell had built his empire by recognizing pivotal moments and acting decisively. This was such a moment, not just for his company, but for the family he hadn't known he wanted until it appeared before him. Brilliant and brave, and already his greatest vulnerability and his greatest strength. With newfound clarity, Richard turned from the window and prepared for battle, not just to save Mitchell Innovations, but to protect the future he suddenly, desperately wanted with the daughter who had his analytical mind and the woman who had been strong enough to raise her alone. The corporate wolves circling his company had no idea what they had awakened. Richard Mitchell had always been a formidable opponent in business, but Richard Mitchell fighting for his family, they were about to discover an entirely different level of determination. The emergency board meeting was as contentious as Richard expected. From his secure video connection in the Sonoma house study, he watched his board members' reactions range from disbelief to outrage as he outlined both the situation and his proposed solution. You want to go public about corporate espionage allegations before we have concrete proof? Harold Freeman, the most senior board member, sputtered in disbelief. Richard, that's unprecedented. As is this coordinated attack on our company, Richard countered calmly. Apex and their allies are counting on us to follow the traditional playbook, quiet legal maneuvering, behind-the-scenes negotiations, protecting our reputation above all else. With good reason, interjected Diane Chen, head of investor relations. Our stock will plummet the moment we admit our proprietary technology has been compromised. Richard leaned closer to the camera. Our stock will plummet regardless, once Apex and Elysium announce their breakthrough using our stolen algorithms. The question isn't whether we take a hit, it's whether we control the narrative. Victoria, seated at the boardroom table in San Francisco, nodded in agreement. Richard's right. By getting ahead of this story, we position ourselves as the victims of corporate theft, rather than a company in crisis. We gain public sympathy and raise questions about Apex's ethics before they can establish their version of events. The debate continued for another hour, with Richard calmly rebutting objections and building his case. It was the kind of corporate battlefield where he had always excelled, marshalling facts, anticipating objections, building consensus through sheer force of will. But today, something was different. Behind his usual tactical brilliance was a new sense of purpose that his board members couldn't quite identify but clearly sensed. Finally, Freeman leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. I've known you for 20 years, Richard. You've never been reckless, but you've always been bold when boldness was warranted. If you believe this is our best course of action, you have my support. One by one, the other board members reluctantly agreed. As the meeting concluded, Victoria remained behind after the others had left the room. The press conference is set for tomorrow morning, she informed him. Are you sure you want to handle it personally? Absolutely, Richard confirmed. This needs to come directly from me. Victoria hesitated. And the personal aspects? Your daughter. How much are you planning to reveal? It was the question Richard had been wrestling with since conceiving this strategy. Apex and their allies clearly knew about Emma. The contract clause proved that. But making her existence public would change her life forever. I need to discuss that with Sarah, he said finally. I'll let you know. After ending the call, Richard stood at the window of the study watching the afternoon sun slant across the vineyard. The property had been his mother's sanctuary in her final years, her reward for a lifetime of sacrifice raising her children alone. She had loved the peace here, the sense of being removed from the frenetic pace of their daily lives. "You're going to tell the world about me, aren't you?" Richard turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically solemn. He shouldn't have been surprised that she'd been listening. It seemed to be her standard operating procedure. "I'm considering it," he answered honestly, "but not without discussing it with you and your mother first." Emma entered the study, perching on the edge of his desk with the unconscious ease of a child who already felt at home in her surroundings. "If you don't tell them about me, how will you explain why they targeted you specifically? The hidden clause in the contract was designed to make you disavow me legally. That's a critical piece of evidence." Richard marveled again at her analytical mind. "Yes, it is. But going public would change things for you, Emma. Once the media discovers Richard Mitchell has a secret daughter, they'll be relentless. Your privacy, your normal life, it would all be compromised." Emma considered this with surprising maturity. "My normal life already changed the moment I walked into your office. There's no going back now." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger thoughtfully. "Besides, hiding me makes it look like you're ashamed. Like I'm something to keep secret." "That's not," Richard began. "I know," Emma interrupted, "but perception matters in business. Isn't that what you always say in your interviews?" Richard couldn't help but smile. "You've read my interviews?" "All of them," Emma confirmed matter-of-factly. "And watched your TED Talks. The one about ethical AI development was particularly interesting, though your stance on privacy paradoxes was somewhat contradictory." Before Richard could respond to this critique of his professional positions, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. "Emma, I've been looking everywhere for you," she admonished gently. "We agreed you'd stay in the garden." "I needed to talk to Dad about his press strategy," Emma explained, as if this were the most natural thing in the world for a 9-year-old to be concerned with. Sarah's eyes moved to Richard. "Press strategy? We need to discuss some things," Richard admitted. "About tomorrow." Emma hopped off the desk. "I'll go explore the library. I saw some first editions that need examining." As she slipped past her mother, Sarah called after her, "Stay in the house, Emma, I mean it." Once they were alone, Richard gestured for Sarah to sit. "The board has approved my plan to go public with everything. The corporate espionage, the stolen technology, the coordinated attack on Mitchell Innovations." Sarah nodded slowly. "That makes sense from a business perspective. Control the narrative. There's more," Richard continued carefully. "To fully explain Apex's strategy and the contract clause requiring me to disavow any previously unacknowledged heirs." "You need to acknowledge Emma publicly," Sarah finished, her expression tightening, "making her a target for media attention." "Yes?" Richard moved to sit beside her. "I won't do it without your consent. We can find another way to explain the contract provision." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the vineyard beyond the windows. "All I've ever wanted was to protect her," she said finally, "to give her a normal childhood despite her extraordinary mind. But I'm beginning to realize that was never truly possible." "She is who she is," Richard agreed softly. "Extraordinary in every way. If we try to hide her now, what message does that send?" Sarah asked, echoing Emma's earlier point, that she's something to be ashamed of, a complication in the great Richard Mitchell's carefully ordered life. "Never," Richard said firmly. "I could never be ashamed of her. But I understand your concern about media attention. It can be somewhat invasive." Sarah turned to him, her expression resolute. "If we're going to do this, if Emma is going to be acknowledged as your daughter, then we do it completely. No half measures. She deserves that much." "What exactly are you proposing?" Richard asked carefully. "That you don't just acknowledge her existence. You claim her properly, legally. Full paternity recognition, your name on her birth certificate, everything." Sarah's gaze was unwavering. "She's a Mitchell, Richard. It's time the world knew it." The declaration hung between them, charged with implications neither had fully articulated until now. This wasn't just about a press conference or a corporate strategy. It was about fundamentally changing their family structure, their legal relationship, their future. "Are you sure?" Richard asked. "Once this is done, it can't be undone," Sarah finished. "I know, but it's the right thing for Emma. She deserves her father's name, her father's protection, her rightful place in your life, Richard." felt something shift inside him, the last resistance to fully embracing his role as Emma's father giving way before Sarah's fierce maternal certainty. "Then that's what we'll do," he agreed quietly. "Together." Sarah nodded once decisively. "I'll talk to Emma, make sure she understands what this means." Though knowing her, she's probably already calculated every possible outcome and developed contingency plans. Richard smiled. "Probably. She's remarkable." They finished in unison, sharing a brief moment of parental pride that transcended their complicated past. The moment was interrupted by Richard's secure phone buzzing again. He checked the display with a frown. "It's Dawson, my head of security." "Excuse me." The call was brief but alarming. When Richard ended it, his expression had hardened into granite. "What is it?" Sarah asked, immediately sensing his tension. "A drone was spotted over the property perimeter," Richard explained, moving to the window to scan the sky. Security shut it down. "It was carrying surveillance equipment." Sarah paled. "They found us already." "Possibly." Richard was already sending rapid-fire messages on his secure device. Or it could be paparazzi. Either way, we need to move. Move again? Sarah stood, her momentary calm shattered. "Richard, this is insane. We can't just keep running." "We're not running," Richard corrected grimly. "We're relocating to a more secure position. My lake house in Tahoe. It's more isolated, with better security infrastructure." The same lake house where Sarah left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear, where they had their brief affair 9 years ago, where Emma was likely conceived. "Yes," Richard acknowledged. "Ironic, isn't it? But it's the last place anyone would expect us to go, and it's the most defensible of my properties." Sarah ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "This feels like it's spiraling out of control, Richard." "It is," he admitted, "but only temporarily. Tomorrow's press conference will reset the board. For now, we need to ensure your safety, both of you." He moved to the door, already shifting into crisis management mode. "Pack whatever you need. The helicopter will be ready in 20 minutes. As Richard strode from the room to coordinate with his security team, Sarah remained by the window, watching the distant figures of security personnel sweeping the perimeter of the property. Just days ago, her greatest concern had been balancing her work schedule with Emma's school activities. Now they were fleeing from surveillance drones in private helicopters, preparing for a media storm that would forever alter their lives. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Sarah Reynolds had survived 9 years as a single mother to a child genius, working multiple jobs and sacrificing everything for her daughter's welfare. If Richard Mitchell thought she would falter now, he had seriously underestimated her resilience. With newfound determination, she went to find Emma and prepare her for their next move in this high-stakes chess game they'd unwittingly joined. 2 hours later, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Pacific, their helicopter crested the Sierra Nevada mountains, revealing the sapphire blue expanse of Lake Tahoe below. The Mitchell Lake House was nestled on the Nevada side of the lake, providing both tax advantages and privacy benefits that Richard had considered essential when purchasing the property 15 years ago. Unlike the modernist glass structure in Sonoma or the Victorian in San Francisco, the Tahoe property resembled a traditional alpine lodge, albeit one equipped with state-of-the-art technology and security features. Its rustic exterior camouflaged its sophisticated infrastructure, making it appear more vacation home than fortress. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed as they descended toward the private dock. "The lake looks like liquid sapphire." Richard glanced at Sarah, who was staring at the approaching property with a complicated expression. This place held memories for her, not all of them unpleasant, judging by the faint color that rose in her cheeks. "We'll be comfortable here," he said, addressing them both. "And safe. The property is completely self-sufficient, with its own power generation and satellite communications. We can manage the press conference remotely tomorrow, and then decide our next steps." The helicopter touched down on a pad near the boathouse, where another security detail awaited them. Richard had arranged for a skeleton staff, only those he trusted implicitly, to prepare the house for their arrival. As they entered the massive great room with its soaring stone fireplace and panoramic lake views, Emma immediately ran to the windows, pressing her hands against the glass to take in the spectacle of mountains reflected in the still water. "Can we go in the lake?" she asked eagerly. "I've never been swimming in a lake before." "It's a bit cold this time of year," Richard cautioned, "but there's an indoor pool in the lower level." "Sweet!" Emma darted off to explore without waiting for permission, her earlier solemnity forgotten in the excitement of discovering yet another of her father's impressive homes. Left alone again, Richard and Sarah stood awkwardly in the great room, the weight of shared memories and unspoken thoughts hanging between them. "You redesigned it," Sarah finally said, looking around at the interior. "It's different than I remember." "Yes," Richard acknowledged. "After my mother passed, I renovated all the properties. She had helped design the original interiors." Sarah nodded, moving toward the massive stone hearth that dominated one wall. "I remember she collected carved bears," she said, noting their absence. "They're in storage," Richard replied, surprised she had recalled such a detail. "I kept everything, just put it away." "Tidying up the past," Sarah observed, a hint of something like sadness in her voice. "You've always been good at that." The comment stung with its accuracy. Richard had indeed spent his life compartmentalizing, organizing, controlling. His environment, his company, his emotions. Until Emma had walked into his office and shattered those careful divisions with her very existence. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Some things can't be tidied away, Sarah. Some things shouldn't be." She met his gaze, searching his face for sincerity. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slightly before turning back to the view. "What happens after tomorrow?" she asked. "After you've made your announcement and claimed Emma publicly, what does our life look like then?" It was the question Richard had been avoiding, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer he wanted to give frightened him with its implications. "That depends," he said carefully, "on what you want." Sarah turned back to him, her expression skeptical. "What I want? Since when has that mattered in the great Richard Mitchell's plans?" "Since now," Richard replied firmly. "Since Emma, since everything changed." He moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of amber in her brown eyes, eyes that Emma had inherited, along with her mother's quiet determination. "I want Emma in my life," he continued, "not just visiting on weekends or holidays, but really in my life. I want to know her, to help raise her, to be the father she deserves." "And me?" Sarah asked quietly. "Where do I fit in this vision?" Richard hesitated, treading carefully through emotional terrain he rarely navigated. "That's up to you. But I'd like us to try to find a way forward together. For Emma's sake and perhaps for our own." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you proposing some kind of arrangement?" "I'm proposing we stop pretending this is temporary," Richard clarified. "Tomorrow, when I acknowledge Emma publicly, everything changes. The press will dig into your life, your circumstances. They'll question why you kept her secret, why you work 3 jobs when her father is a billionaire. They'll create a narrative whether we provide one or not." "And what narrative would you prefer they create?" Sarah challenged. "One that's true," Richard replied simply. "That I didn't know about my daughter, but now that I do, I'm claiming her fully. That her mother raised her brilliantly on her own, but now we're building a future together, whatever form that takes." Sarah studied him, skepticism and hope warring in her expression. "You've had less than 48 hours to process becoming a father, Richard. Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not," he insisted. "This isn't impulse or guilt or corporate strategy. This is clarity, for the first time in years." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice called from the hallway. "Dad, the indoor pool has a water slide. And Mom, there's a library with first editions of Jane Austen. Come see." Sarah's smile was soft and genuine. "She's happier than I've seen her in a long time. All these years she's been missing something she couldn't quite name." "So have I," Richard admitted quietly. "I just didn't realize it until now." Their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. Not reconciliation exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something new. Before either could speak again, Richard's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. Victoria's text was brief but alarming. "Emergency press leak. Apex announcing major neural network breakthrough tomorrow AM. Using our tech. Need to accelerate timeline." "Damn it," Richard muttered, immediately switching back to crisis mode. "They're moving faster than we anticipated. The press conference needs to happen tonight, not tomorrow. Sarah tensed. Tonight? Is that even possible? It has to be. Richard was already dialing Victoria. We need to get ahead of this. If Apex announces first, claiming breakthroughs using our stolen technology, the narrative becomes much harder to control. As he coordinated the accelerated timeline with Victoria, Sarah moved to the windows, watching the sun begin to set over the mountains. The tranquil beauty of the scene belied the corporate war raging beyond these walls. A war that had already engulfed her and Emma, changing their lives irrevocably. In less than 2 days, they had gone from anonymous existence to the center of a high-stakes corporate battle. By tomorrow morning, the world would know Emma as Richard Mitchell's daughter. There would be no going back to their quiet life, their small apartment, their carefully managed routines. Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or exhilarated by the prospect. Perhaps both were appropriate responses to the seismic shift their lives had undergone. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Behind her, she heard Richard issuing rapid instructions, his voice confident and commanding. This was the man she remembered from 9 years ago. Brilliant, decisive, unstoppable when focused on a goal. But now that formidable intelligence and determination were being channeled not just toward corporate victory, but toward protecting their daughter. Perhaps, Sarah thought as she watched the fading light turn the lake to molten gold, there was hope in that shift. Hope for Emma to have the father she deserved. Hope for a future none of them had imagined possible just days ago. And perhaps even hope for Sarah herself, though that was a fragile possibility she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. Richard ended his call and turned to her. It's set. 7 p.m. Pacific time. National broadcast from here. Remote connection to the Mitchell Innovations headquarters, where Victoria will handle the technical aspects. His expression was grim but determined. Are you ready for this? Sarah straightened her shoulders, channeling the same strength that had carried her through 9 years of single motherhood. No, she answered honestly. But I will be. Richard's smile was brief but genuine. That's all any of us can do. In the distance, they could hear Emma's delighted laughter, echoing from somewhere deep in the house, innocent joy in stark contrast to the tension surrounding the adults. In that bright sound, both Richard and Sarah found renewed purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together for Emma's sake, and for the family they were unexpectedly becoming. The study of Richard's Tahoe house had been transformed into an impromptu broadcast studio. Professional lighting cast a warm glow on the wall of books behind his desk, while a discreet camera had been positioned to capture both Richard and the spectacular lake view beyond the windows. The scene projected authority and calm, exactly the image Richard wanted to convey, to counterbalance the bombshell announcements he was about to make. 3 minutes to broadcast, the communications specialist announced, making final adjustments to the equipment. The young woman had arrived via helicopter just an hour earlier, part of the hastily assembled team Victoria had dispatched from San Francisco. Richard stood before a mirror, straightening his tie, a deep blue silk that Victoria had insisted would project trustworthiness and strength on camera. His usual confidence was tempered by an unfamiliar nervousness. He had given hundreds of interviews, keynote speeches, and press conferences throughout his career, but never one so personally consequential. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. Sarah entered, looking composed in a simple black dress that Richard had arranged to have delivered, along with a selection of other clothing. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and she wore minimal makeup that highlighted her natural beauty. Emma's watching a movie downstairs with Dawson, she said. I thought it best she not watch this live. Richard nodded, grateful for her foresight. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, Sarah replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her dress. It's not every day your life changes forever on national television. Despite the tension, Richard smiled. If it's any consolation, I've been told I'm quite photogenic. The joke, weak as it was, had the desired effect. Sarah's posture relaxed slightly, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. Always the confident CEO. Confidence is expected, Richard replied, even when it's not entirely felt. The admission of vulnerability, rare from Richard Mitchell, hung in the air between them. Before Sarah could respond, the communications specialist approached them. 90 seconds. Mr. Mitchell, we need you at the desk. Richard nodded, turning back to Sarah. You don't have to be part of this if you don't want to. This was my decision, my strategy. Our daughter, our decision, Sarah corrected firmly. I'll be watching from the side. Just don't make promises you can't keep, Richard. Not about Emma, not about us. Richard held her gaze. Every word I say tonight will be the truth. You have my word. Something in his expression must have conveyed his sincerity, because Sarah nodded once before stepping away to the periphery of the makeshift studio. Richard moved to the desk and settled into the leather chair, adjusting his posture to project the confident authority expected of him. 30 seconds, the specialist counted down. Live feed to all major networks established. Mitchell Innovations headquarters standing by. Richard took a deep breath, centering himself. In his earpiece, he could hear Victoria's voice from San Francisco. Remember the key points, Richard. Calm, decisive, forthright. We're countering a narrative of deception with absolute transparency. 10 seconds, the specialist announced. 5, 4, 3. The final countdown was silent, ending with a pointed finger directing Richard to begin. Good evening, Richard began, looking directly into the camera. I'm Richard Mitchell, founder and CEO of Mitchell Innovations. I'm speaking to you tonight to address a matter of grave concern not only to my company and its shareholders, but to everyone who values integrity in business and protection of intellectual property in America. His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering as he continued. Earlier today, Mitchell Innovations discovered evidence of a coordinated corporate espionage campaign targeting our proprietary neural network technology. This attack involved multiple high-ranking executives within my company who have been secretly working with our competitors, specifically Apex Global and Elysium Technologies, to steal the algorithms that have made Mitchell Innovations a leader in artificial intelligence. Richard paused, allowing the gravity of the accusation to register. We have confirmed that James Taylor, our former CFO, and Andrew Parker, formerly head of product development, systematically extracted confidential information and provided it to our competitors in exchange for substantial financial compensation. Both have been removed from the company and are now the subjects of criminal investigations. In his peripheral vision, Richard could see Sarah watching intently, her expression a mixture of concern and pride. Drawing strength from her presence, he continued. Tomorrow morning, Apex Global intended to announce what they would call a breakthrough in neural network technology. Technology that was, in fact, stolen from Mitchell Innovations. By coming forward tonight, we are setting the record straight before their deception can take root. He leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. But this corporate theft goes beyond standard industrial espionage. In their attempt to secure control of our technology, Apex Global and their co-conspirators employed tactics that crossed ethical and legal boundaries in ways that have profound personal implications. This was the moment, the bridge between the corporate narrative and the personal revelation. Richard took a breath, aware that his next words would change his family's life forever. During negotiations for a proposed merger with Apex Global, I discovered a hidden clause in the contract that would have required me to legally disavow any previously unacknowledged heirs as a condition of the deal. At the time, this seemed merely unusual. Today, I understand it was deliberately targeted. Richard's expression softened slightly. 2 days ago, a remarkable young girl came to my office with information about these hidden contract provisions. Information that saved Mitchell Innovations from a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. This child, through her extraordinary intelligence and determination, uncovered what teams of corporate lawyers had missed. He paused again, emotion now visible in his expression. What makes this story exceptional is that this young girl, Emma Reynolds, is my daughter. A daughter I did not know existed until that moment. The declaration hung in the air, simple but profound. In his earpiece, Richard could hear the controlled chaos erupting at Mitchell Innovations headquarters as press representatives bombarded Victoria with questions. But he maintained his focus, continuing with the most personal public statement he had ever made. 9 years ago, Emma's mother, Sarah Reynolds, made the difficult decision to raise our daughter alone, believing with good reason that I would not welcome the complication of a child in my life at that time. She has done a
Cada uno de
remarkable
vosotros
job,
tenéis uno.
sacrificing everything to provide
Todos
Emma with
podéis
every
cambiar.
opportunity possible. The woman I was 9 years ago did not deserve either of them. The man I am today is determined to earn my place in their lives. Richard's gaze momentarily shifted to Sarah, who stood absolutely still, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He returned his focus to the camera. It is now clear that Apex Global and their allies discovered my daughter's existence and incorporated it into their strategy to control Mitchell Innovations. They presumed that when faced with a choice between my company and acknowledging my child, I would choose my company. His voice took on a new intensity. They were wrong. I will not be coerced into denying my daughter. I will not allow corporate predators to use my family as leverage. And I will not stand idle while the technology my team has spent years developing is stolen through deception and betrayal. In his earpiece, Victoria's voice was approving. Perfect, Richard. Now the action plan. Richard straightened in his chair. Effective immediately, Mitchell Innovations is filing federal charges against Apex Global. Elysium Technologies, James Taylor, and Andrew Parker for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, wire fraud and criminal conspiracy. We are seeking an emergency injunction, preventing them from utilizing or profiting from our stolen technology. He continued outlining the company's immediate response, his voice calm and authoritative, as he detailed the legal and corporate actions already underway. Throughout, he maintained the delicate balance between corporate leader and newly discovered father, a duality that would define his public image from this moment forward. In closing, Richard said, as he neared the end of his prepared remarks, I want to address the personal aspect of this situation directly. I am fully acknowledging Emma Reynolds as my daughter, and will be legally changing her surname to Mitchell with her mother's consent. While I regret the 9 years I missed, I intend to be fully present for her future. His expression softened further, becoming more personal than the public had ever seen from the normally stoic CEO. To those who would use my family as pawns in a corporate game, know this, you have miscalculated severely. What you intended as my greatest vulnerability has become my greatest strength. I will protect my daughter and her mother with the same determination and resources I bring to protecting Mitchell Innovations. With a final look directly into the camera, Richard concluded, "Thank you for your attention. I will not be taking questions at this time, but Mitchell Innovations will issue detailed statements regarding the corporate actions tomorrow morning. Good night." The red light on the camera blinked off. In the sudden silence, Richard could hear his own heartbeat. It was done. The world now knew about Emma. There was no going back. Perfect timing, Richard. Victoria's voice came through his earpiece. Exactly 7 minutes. The networks are going crazy. CNN and MSNBC are already running with it, and social media is exploding. Richard removed the earpiece, suddenly exhausted. He looked up to find Sarah approaching, her expression impossible to read. "Well," she said quietly, "that was quite a declaration." "Too much?" Richard asked, surprising himself with the need for her approval. Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, it was right. Everything you said about Emma was right." The communications specialist and her team were already dismantling the temporary studio, giving them as much privacy as possible in the circumstances. "Victoria says the immediate response is overwhelming," Richard informed her. "It's going to be a media circus for a while." "I expected nothing less," Sarah replied, her practical nature asserting itself. "Emma will be thrilled. She loves being the center of attention." Despite the gravity of the moment, Richard smiled. "I've noticed." Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the darkened lake. "You said her name would be Mitchell." "With your consent," Richard reminded her. "I wouldn't presume—" "It's her birthright," Sarah interrupted quietly. "It should have been her name from the beginning." The simple acknowledgement eased something in Richard's chest, a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah turned back to him. "What happens now, practically speaking?" It was the question they'd been circling since arriving at Tahoe, what their future looked like beyond the immediate crisis. Richard had been developing an answer, but he approached it cautiously, aware of the delicate balance between them. "For the immediate future, we should stay here," he began. "The media will be swarming both my San Francisco house and your apartment. Here we have privacy and security, while the initial frenzy dies down." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And after that?" "That depends," Richard said carefully. "On what you want, Sarah. What's best for Emma?" "What I want," Sarah repeated, a hint of irony in her voice. "What I want is for Emma to have stability, security, and a relationship with her father. What I want is for her extraordinary mind to have the opportunities it deserves. What I want..." She hesitated, vulnerability flickering across her face. "What I want is to stop working 3 jobs, just to keep our heads above water." Richard moved closer to her, close enough to see the fatigue etched around her eyes, the weariness of 9 years of constant struggle. "I can give Emma all of that," he promised. "And I can give you freedom from that burden. No more cleaning houses, no more night shifts. You could finish the nursing degree you started before Emma was born." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "Emma mentioned it yesterday," Richard admitted. "She's very proud of you. She said you had to drop out when you were pregnant with her. 1 semester short of graduating," Sarah confirmed softly. "It wasn't practical to continue." "It could be practical now," Richard suggested, "if you wanted." Sarah studied him, searching for ulterior motives. "And where would we live while I'm finishing this degree?" "In your mansion." "As what, Richard? Your house guests? Your charity cases?" "As family," Richard replied simply. "Emma is my daughter. That makes you family too, regardless of our personal relationship." The word hung between them. Relationship, loaded with unspoken questions and possibilities. "And what exactly is our personal relationship, Richard?" Sarah asked directly, meeting his gaze. 2 days ago we were strangers, who shared a brief affair 9 years ago. Now we're planning a future together for our daughter. Where do we stand with each other? It was the question Richard had been avoiding, not because he didn't have feelings, but because those feelings confused and unsettled him. Sarah Reynolds had been a pleasant memory from his past, a brief connection with a beautiful, intelligent woman who had worked in his summer home. Now she was the mother of his child, a woman whose strength and sacrifice he admired deeply, someone he was coming to respect in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I know I admire you, Sarah. I know I'm grateful to you for raising our daughter so well. And I know that when I look at you now, I see something I've never prioritized in my life, the possibility of a connection that isn't about business or achievement or success." Sarah's expression softened at his candor. "That's surprisingly honest." "You deserve honesty," Richard replied. "After 9 years of raising my child alone, you deserve nothing less." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice called from the hallway. "Mom? Dad? Is it over? Can I come in?" They exchanged a glance, the moment of intimacy broken but not forgotten. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah called back. "You can come in now." Emma bounded into the room, still in her pajamas despite the relatively early hour. "Did you do it? Did you tell everyone about me?" Richard nodded, unable to suppress a smile at her eagerness. "I did. The whole world knows you're my daughter now." Emma's grin was incandescent. "So I'm Emma Mitchell now? Officially?" "Soon," Sarah corrected. "There's paperwork involved." "But yes," Richard confirmed, "if that's what you want." "It is," Emma said firmly. "Emma Reynolds is a nobody. Emma Mitchell is somebody. Emma Mitchell gets access to labs and resources and can really make a difference." The mercenary assessment startled a laugh from Richard. "Is that all my name means to you? Access to resources?" Emma considered this with her characteristic directness. "No, it means belonging to someone who understands me. Someone like me." Her expression turned suddenly vulnerable, revealing the child beneath the precocious intellect. "It means having a dad." Richard felt something crack in his chest, the last defensive wall around his emotions giving way before this remarkable child. Without hesitation, he knelt and opened his arms. Emma flew into them, hugging him fiercely. Over her head, his eyes met Sarah's. She was watching them with a complex expression, joy and sorrow mingled, past regrets and future hopes colliding. Richard extended one arm toward her, an invitation that surprised them both. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah joined them, completing the circle.
Las granjas
For the first
invernales.
time, they embraced as a family, awkward and uncertain, but undeniably connected. So what happens now?
Fin de semana, tío.
Emma asked, her voice muffled against Richard's shoulder. Do we go back to San Francisco? Do I go to a new school? Do we live in your big house? One step at a time, Sarah soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. For now, we're staying here until things calm down. Your mother's right, Richard agreed, releasing them both reluctantly. The press will be intense for a while. We need to let the story stabilize before making any major changes. Emma stepped back, her analytical mind already processing the implications. But you'll need to go back to Mitchell Innovations soon. The corporate espionage crisis requires your physical presence for optimal crisis management. Richard exchanged an amused glance with Sarah. She's not wrong, he admitted. She rarely is, Sarah replied dryly. It's exhausting. Emma ignored this exchange, already plotting their future with characteristic decisiveness. We should all go to San Francisco. Mom can enroll in the nursing program at UCSF to finish her degree. I can transfer to the Westridge Academy for gifted students. Their STEM program is vastly superior to my current school. And we can all live in your house until we determine the optimal long-term living arrangements. The matter-of-fact way she outlined their future, as if these decisions were simple. Logistics rather than life-altering changes left both adults momentarily speechless. Emma, Sarah began cautiously, these are complex decisions that your father and I need to discuss. You've been discussing for 2 days, Emma interrupted with the impatience of childhood. Meanwhile, Apex and their allies are regrouping. We need to maintain momentum. She turned to Richard. Isn't that what you always say in your interviews? In business, momentum is everything. Richard couldn't help but laugh. Using my own words against me already. You really are my daughter. Emma beamed at him, clearly taking this as a compliment rather than an admonishment. So it's settled then? We go to San Francisco, Mom finishes her degree. I go to Westridge and we fight the corporate bad guys together. Richard looked at Sarah, silently acknowledging that their daughter's simplified plan actually addressed many of their immediate concerns. What do you think? He asked, genuinely seeking her input. It doesn't have to be exactly as Emma describes, but the general direction... Sarah sighed, a mixture of exasperation and affection. You two are exhaustingly alike, you know that? She considered for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, we can try San Francisco, on a provisional basis. But I want my own space, Richard. If we're staying at your house, I need independence, not domesticity. Of course, Richard agreed quickly, understanding her need for boundaries. The East Wing has a complete guest apartment, private entrance, separate kitchen, everything you'd need. And I can access Dad's tech lab whenever I want? Emma pressed, sensing victory. Supervised access, Sarah and Richard corrected in unison, sharing a brief smile at their parental synchronicity. Emma rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Fine, supervised for now. Her expression brightened suddenly. Can we go swimming before bed? The indoor pool has colored lights. Sarah checked her watch. 20 minutes, then bed. It's already past your normal bedtime. As Emma dashed off to change into her swimsuit, Sarah turned back to Richard. This is temporary, she reminded him. We're not playing house, Richard. We are giving Emma stability during a crisis. Understood, he agreed seriously. No assumptions, no pressure, just cooperation for Emma's sake. Sarah nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. I should go supervise the pool adventure before she tries to reprogram the filtration system or something equally concerning. As she turned to go, Richard called after her. Sarah? She paused, looking back. Thank you for everything, for Emma, for giving me a chance to be her father now. Something in his sincerity seemed to reach her. Her expression softened into a genuine smile, the first he'd seen since their reunion. She's been waiting for you her whole life, Richard. Don't let her down. I won't, he promised. Not her. Not you. After Sarah left, Richard stood alone in the study, the remnants of the broadcast setup still being dismantled around him. His phone was already filling with messages from board members, executives, and media outlets, the inevitable aftermath of his revelation. The corporate battle was just beginning, and the challenges ahead were substantial. Yet for the first time in his career, Richard Mitchell found himself thinking beyond the next quarter's earnings or the next product launch. He was thinking about a future that included family dinners, school science fairs, and watching his brilliant daughter grow into the remarkable woman she would undoubtedly become. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, rather like diving into the deep end of a pool without knowing if you remembered how to swim. But as he heard Emma's delighted laughter echoing from somewhere deep in the house, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he was prepared to risk drowning for the chance to be the father she deserved. The world had changed forever tonight. Richard Mitchell, billionaire, tech titan, corporate warrior, had publicly become Richard Mitchell father. And somehow that new identity felt more significant than all his previous achievements combined. 3 months later, the San Francisco fog swirled around Mitchell Innovations' headquarters, softening the gleaming glass and steel structure against the early morning sky. Inside his executive office, Richard studied the latest financial reports with satisfaction. The company's stock had not only recovered from the initial shock of the corporate espionage revelation, but had climbed to record heights as public sentiment rallied behind what the media had dubbed the Mitchell family redemption story. The federal investigation into Apex Global and Elysium Technologies was proceeding methodically, with James Taylor now cooperating with authorities in exchange for leniency. Charles Montgomery had been forced to resign as CEO of Apex amid shareholder outrage, and Andrew Parker was facing multiple felony charges for intellectual property theft. Victoria entered without knocking, a habit she'd developed over their 15 years of working together. "The board is ready whenever you are," she announced, setting a coffee on his desk, a new addition to their morning routine that he suspected had more to do with checking on his mental state than providing caffeine. "How do I look?" Richard asked, straightening his tie. "Appropriately paternal, yet professionally intimidating?" Victoria's lips twitched with amusement. "How you look like a man who's getting 4 hours of sleep a night and loving every minute of it." 5 hours, actually, Richard corrected with a slight smile. Emma has finally stopped reprogramming the house security system at midnight. The casual mention of his daughter no longer felt strange or performative. In the months since his public acknowledgement of Emma, Richard had embraced fatherhood with the same intensity and commitment he brought to his business endeavors. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been arguments, boundaries crossed and reset, moments of profound doubt, but the trajectory was undeniably positive. "The media requests continue to pile up," Victoria noted as they walked toward the boardroom. "People magazine wants a family photo shoot. 60 Minutes is requesting an in-depth interview. Even the Harvard Business Review is interested in your transformation from corporate titan to devoted father." Richard shook his head. Declined, and I'll think about the Harvard piece. Emma would enjoy the intellectual credibility, and Sarah might actually read that one. The mention of Sarah brought a knowing look from Victoria. The relationship between Richard and his daughter's mother remained the subject of intense speculation, both inside and outside the company. They had maintained careful boundaries since relocating to San Francisco, Sarah and Emma occupying the east wing of Richard's home as planned, with Sarah insisting on a formal rental agreement that Richard had reluctantly accepted. Sarah had indeed enrolled at UCSF to complete her nursing degree, her tuition quietly handled by a Mitchell Innovations Educational Foundation. Emma had been admitted to Westridge Academy after testing off the charts on their entrance examinations, and Richard had found himself navigating the unfamiliar terrain of school drop-offs, parent-teacher conferences, and enforcing bedtimes for a child who could debate philosophy but still needed reminders to brush her teeth. "The press is calling it the ultimate modern family," Victoria commented as they approached the boardroom. "The billionaire CEO, the nursing student, and the child genius. The press can call it whatever they want," Richard replied. "We're just figuring it out day by day." Victoria paused, her expression turning serious. "Are you happy, Richard, truly?" The question would have seemed impertinent 3 months ago, beyond the boundaries of their professional relationship. But Victoria had witnessed the transformation in Richard firsthand, had seen the rigid, work-obsessed CEO evolve into someone more balanced, more human. She'd earned the right to ask. "Yes," Richard answered simply, in ways I never expected to be. The board meeting proceeded efficiently, with unanimous approval for the new security protocols Richard had instituted following the espionage incident. Emma's recommendations, delivered through her father but unmistakably bearing her intellectual signature, had been incorporated into the company's revised cybersecurity architecture, creating what industry experts were already calling the Mitchell Firewall. As the meeting concluded, Harold Freeman, the senior board member who had known Richard longest, lingered behind. "Fatherhood suits you," the older man observed. "Your mother would be proud." The mention of his mother, a woman who had raised Richard and his sister alone after their father abandoned the family, struck a chord. "She would have adored Emma," Richard agreed. "They're similar in many ways. That same determination to fix whatever's broken around them." "And Sarah?" Freeman asked with the directness of long acquaintance. "How is that situation progressing?" Richard recognized the question beneath the question. "Sarah is not a situation, Harold. She's Emma's mother and one of the strongest people I've ever known." Freeman nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. The board would support formalization of the arrangement if that's where things are heading, for stability if nothing else. "Stability doesn't always require traditional structures," Richard replied, thinking of Sarah's fierce independence and their carefully calibrated co-parenting arrangement. "But I appreciate the sentiment." After leaving the office, Richard found himself driving not directly home but toward the UCSF campus, where Sarah would be finishing her clinical rotation. The decision wasn't entirely conscious, a deviation from his usual precision-planned schedule that would have been unthinkable before Emma entered his life. He found Sarah in the hospital cafe, still wearing her student nurse scrubs, textbooks spread across a corner table as she studied during her break. She looked up in surprise as he approached. "Richard, is everything okay?" "Is Emma..." "Emma's fine," he assured her quickly. "Still at school." "Debate club runs until 5. Sarah relaxed, closing her book. "Then to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Board meeting run short?" "Actually, yes," Richard admitted, taking the seat across from her. "And I don't know. I thought maybe we could pick Emma up together. Stop for ice cream after." Sarah studied him, a slight smile playing at her lips. Richard Mitchell spontaneously suggesting ice cream. "The transformation is complete." He laughed, accepting the gentle teasing. "The board thinks I've gone soft. Victoria thinks I've found balance. What do you think?" "I think..." Sarah considered her words carefully. "I think you're becoming the man you might have been all along, if life had taken different turns." The observation was startlingly insightful, touching on something Richard had been feeling but couldn't articulate. Before he could respond, Sarah gathered her books, glancing at her watch. "I need to finish this rotation report before picking up Emma," she said, her practical nature asserting itself. "But ice cream after debate club sounds nice. We could try that place on Valencia Street she's been talking about." "Perfect," Richard agreed, standing as she did. "I'll meet you at the school." As they walked toward the exit, their hands brushed accidentally. 3 months ago, Sarah would have pulled away immediately, maintaining the careful physical distance she'd established between them. Today, she let the contact linger for a moment, not quite taking his hand, but not rejecting the proximity either. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but to Richard, who had built a fortune recognizing patterns and anticipating shifts, it felt significant, a micro-move in a delicate game they'd been playing since reuniting. "Richard," Sarah said as they reached the hospital entrance, her tone turning serious. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." He turned to her, curious. "What is it?" "The East Wing apartment, our arrangement. The 6-month lease is coming up for renewal soon." Richard nodded, keeping his expression carefully neutral despite the sudden acceleration of his heart rate. "It is. I assumed you'd want to renew it." Sarah hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Actually, I've been thinking. The commute from your house to the hospital is quite long, especially during my clinical rotations. And Emma's school is in the opposite direction." "I see," Richard said, though he didn't, not really. Was she suggesting they move out? "Find a place closer to the hospital?" "There's a faculty housing complex near the medical center," Sarah continued. "They have family units available for student nurses with children. The rent is subsidized and it would be much more convenient." Richard felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. After 3 months of their careful dance, respecting boundaries while gradually building trust, creating their unconventional family dynamic, Sarah was suggesting separating their households again, moving Emma out of his daily life. "If that's what you want," he said, his corporate mask slipping into place to hide his disappointment. "Of course I'll support whatever makes things easier for you and Emma." Sarah studied his face. "That's not what I'm suggesting, Richard," she said quietly. "I'm suggesting I might take one of those units. For myself. For when I'm on overnight rotations or late clinicals. Not as our primary residence." Richard's confusion must have shown on his face, because Sarah continued more directly. "The East Wing arrangement was important when we first moved in. I needed that separation, that independence. But Emma is constantly running between the wings anyway, and we end up having most dinners together in the main kitchen. The formality seems unnecessary now." Understanding dawned slowly. "Are you suggesting you and Emma move into the main house? Properly?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending we're just co-parents, sharing a property for convenience. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that whatever is happening between us deserves the chance to develop without artificial barriers." The directness of her statement, so characteristic of Sarah's no-nonsense approach to life, left Richard momentarily speechless. For 3 months, they had been carefully circling closer to each other, family dinners evolving from awkward obligations to genuine pleasure, movie nights with Emma expanding to include occasional late conversations after she went to bed. The gradual, tentative rebuilding of trust between two people who were raising a child together. "Sarah," Richard began carefully, "are you sure? You've been adamant about maintaining your independence." "Independence doesn't mean isolation," she replied. "It means having agency, making my own choices." Her gaze was steady, confident. "This is my choice, Richard, if you're open to it." "I am," he said immediately, then moderated his eagerness. "But I want to be clear about what this means. I don't want there to be any misunderstandings." Sarah's smile held a hint of amusement. "Always the careful negotiator. Let me be explicit then. I'm suggesting we explore what a relationship might look like between us. A real relationship, not just a co-parenting arrangement. Slowly on our own terms, with Emma's well-being as the priority." Richard felt something expand in his chest. Hope, possibility, a future he hadn't dared imagine when Emma first walked into his office 3 months ago. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Very much." The moment was interrupted by Richard's phone buzzing insistently. He glanced at it with a frown. "It's the school." A flash of concern crossed Sarah's face as he answered. "Richard Mitchell," he said crisply. The voice of Westridge Academy's headmistress came through clearly. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Harrington. There's been an incident involving Emma. Nothing serious," she added quickly. "But we do need you or Ms. Reynolds to come to the school." Richard's expression must have betrayed his concern, because Sarah moved closer immediately. "What's happened?" he asked, putting the call on speaker. "Emma accessed the school's administrative system and, well, rearranged the lunch menu for the next month. She's replaced it with what she calls nutritionally optimized meal plans based on cognitive enhancement research." Richard and Sarah exchanged a glance, parental concern giving way to shared amusement. This was so quintessentially Emma. Brilliant, well-intentioned, and completely unconcerned with conventional boundaries. "We'll be right there," Richard assured the headmistress, ending the call. He turned to Sarah with a rueful smile. "Apparently our daughter is now designing brain-boosting lunch menus for her classmates." "Of course she is," Sarah sighed, though her expression was more proud than exasperated. "We really need to work on her understanding of appropriate boundaries." "We will," Richard agreed, holding the door for her as they exited the hospital. Together. The drive to Westridge Academy was filled with comfortable conversation, a stark contrast to the tense silences that had characterized their early interactions after reuniting. By the time they arrived at the prestigious school with its ivy-covered buildings and manicured grounds, they had already developed a unified approach to addressing Emma's latest boundary-crossing innovation. In the headmistress's office, they found Emma sitting calmly in an oversized chair, tablet in hand, looking utterly unrepentant. "The standard lunch menu is nutritionally deficient," she explained before either parent could speak. I simply optimized it based on current research on brain development in adolescence. The kitchen staff actually thanked me. Mrs. Peterson said the old menu was boring as dirt, and my suggestions were fancy but doable. Dr. Harrington, a stern woman with a reputation for maintaining discipline among even the most privileged students, seemed torn between irritation and reluctant admiration. While Emma's nutritional research is impressive, she told Richard and Sarah, hacking into the school's administrative system is strictly prohibited, even if it's for a good cause. Emma asked innocently. Even then, Richard confirmed, using his most serious CEO voice, systems have security protocols for important reasons. Emma, we've discussed this. Emma had the grace to look slightly chastened, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the pleased glint in her eye when Dr. Harrington admitted the school was actually considering implementing some of her menu suggestions. With proper approval channels next time, the headmistress emphasized. As they left the school, Emma bouncing between them with undiminished energy, despite her official reprimand, Richard felt a profound sense of rightness. This was his family. Brilliant, challenging, unconventional, and absolutely perfect in their imperfection. Ice cream, he suggested, fulfilling their earlier plan despite the disciplinary detour. Yes, Emma exclaimed immediately. After we discuss appropriate uses of your programming skills, Sarah amended, giving Emma a pointed look. Fine, Emma agreed with dramatic resignation. But can we talk about the other thing too, the thing you were going to ask Dad about our living arrangement? Richard and Sarah exchanged surprised glances over Emma's head. How did you... Sarah began. I've been monitoring your text messages, Emma admitted casually. Just the ones between you two, she added, as if this made the invasion of privacy less concerning. Emma! Both parents exclaimed in unison. What? She asked innocently. I needed to ensure optimal information flow for family decision-making. Your communication patterns have been frustratingly indirect. Richard suppressed a laugh, catching Sarah's eye as she struggled to maintain a stern expression. Their daughter was impossible, brilliant, exhausting, and wonderful. A perfect reflection of both of them in different ways. We will definitely be discussing digital privacy along with appropriate programming applications, Richard said firmly, guiding them toward his car. But yes, there are some changes coming to our living arrangements. Your mother and I are exploring options. Emma rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of pre-adolescence. You're finally admitting you like each other. It's about time. I calculated an 87% probability of relationship progression based on pupillary dilation patterns and unconscious proximity behaviors over the past 6 weeks. You've been studying our pupillary dilation? Sarah asked incredulously. Among other physiological indicators, Emma confirmed matter-of-factly. The data was quite conclusive. I've prepared a presentation if you'd like to review my findings. That won't be necessary, Richard assured her hastily, meeting Sarah's gaze over their daughter's head. The look they shared, equal parts exasperation, amusement, and deep affection, felt like a promise, an understanding, a foundation for whatever came next. As they drove toward the ice cream parlor, Emma chattering about the nutritional profiles of various flavors and their cognitive effects, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 months. He had gone from solitary corporate, tied into part of this remarkable unconventional family. His priorities had shifted, his perspective transformed, his life enriched in ways he could never have anticipated. The corporate battle with Apex continued in courtrooms and boardrooms across the country. Mitchell Innovations faced new challenges and opportunities daily. But for perhaps the first time in his adult life, Richard Mitchell's identity was not solely defined by his company or his wealth. He was Emma's father. He was Sarah's. Whatever they were becoming to each other, he was part of something that mattered more than quarterly projections or stock valuations. As they parked near the trendy ice cream shop on Valencia Street, Emma bounced out of the car with typical enthusiasm. Sarah lingered for a moment, her hand finding Richard's as Emma dashed ahead. This isn't going to be easy, she said quietly. Any of it. Richard squeezed her hand gently. The best things rarely are. Sarah smiled, that full, genuine smile that had once been so rare, but now appeared with increasing frequency. When did you become an optimist, Richard Mitchell?
No empiezo a pelear
When
con nadie, con
a
ningún.
9-year-old girl walked into my office and saved me from corporate sabotage, he replied honestly. And when her mother gave me a second chance I probably didn't deserve, Sarah's expression softened. You're earning it, day by day. Ahead of them, Emma had reached the ice cream shop door and turned back impatiently. Come on, they have a new flavor with 72% cacao and natural nootropic compounds. Richard and Sarah exchanged a glance of shared parental amusement before following their daughter into the shop, still holding hands. The San Francisco fog was lifting, sunlight breaking through in golden shafts that illuminated the colorful Victorian facades along the street. Inside the ice cream parlor, Emma was already deep in conversation with the bewildered server about the cognitive benefits of various ingredients, her enthusiasm infectious. As Richard watched his daughter, his brilliant, impossible daughter, who had upended his carefully controlled life and shown him what truly mattered, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him throughout his driven, achievement-oriented adulthood. Triple chocolate for Emma, vanilla bean for me, Sarah was ordering. Comfortable making decisions for their daughter with the confidence of 9 years of single parenting. She glanced at Richard. And for you. Surprise me, he said, enjoying the look of mild shock that crossed her face at this uncharacteristic flexibility from a man known for his precise preferences. Sarah studied the menu thoughtfully before selecting. Sea salt caramel, she decided. Sweet but with complexity. Seems appropriate. The description could have applied equally well to their evolving relationship. Unexpected sweetness balanced by the complexity of their past and the challenges of their present. But as the three of them settled at a small table by the window, Emma already explaining the chemical properties of chocolate, while Richard and Sarah listened with fond attention, the future seemed full of possibility. The path ahead would not be simple or straightforward. There would be disagreements about parenting approaches, adjustments to their new living arrangements, the ongoing navigation of Richard's public role, and the media attention it brought. Sarah would need to find her place in Richard's world without sacrificing her hard-won independence. Richard would continue learning to balance corporate responsibilities with family priorities, and Emma would undoubtedly challenge them both with her brilliant mind and boundary-pushing tendencies. But watching his daughter's animated expression, as she detailed her latest scientific theory, feeling Sarah's shoulder warm against his as she leaned in to better hear Emma's explanation, Richard knew with absolute certainty that every challenge would be worth facing together. 3 months ago, he had been Richard Mitchell, billionaire CEO, alone at the top of the corporate world he had built, through single-minded determination. Today, he was still Richard Mitchell, still CEO, still responsible for thousands of employees and millions in shareholder value. But he was also a father, discovering the joy of family dinners and science project assistance. He was a partner, tentatively building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared purpose. He was part of something larger than himself, a family. Not the family he had planned or expected, something better, something real. As Emma finished her elaborate explanation and turned her attention to her ice cream with childlike enthusiasm, Sarah caught Richard's eye over their daughter's head. The look they shared held no dramatic declarations or promises of forever. They were both too practical for such sentimentality. But it held understanding, appreciation, and the quiet acknowledgement that whatever happened next, they would face it as partners in the most important venture of their lives, raising the remarkable child they had created together. For Richard Mitchell, who had built an empire on his ability to predict outcomes and control variables, the beautiful uncertainty of that future felt like the greatest adventure yet.